Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the third Youth Access to American Jobs and Aviation Task Force meeting. We are coming to you today on Zoom and on the FAA's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter live streams. For any reporters joining us on this live stream, please note that all discussions are for background only. A video archive of the event will be available on the FAA's social media accounts after the meeting ends. Now, I will read the Federal Advisory Committee Act official statement. This meeting is being held pursuant to a notice published in the Federal Register on May the 14th, 2021. The agenda for the meeting was announced in that notice, with details as set out in the agenda posted on the FAA committee website. I am the designated federal officer responsible for compliance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act, under which the meeting is conducted. It is my responsibility to see to it that the agenda is adhered to and that accurate minutes are kept. I also have the responsibility to adjourn the meeting should I find it necessary to do so in the public interest. Only the Youth Access to American Jobs and Aviation Task Force members may participate in any discussions and vote on matters put to a vote by the chair. Now, I will turn the meeting over to the chair, Sharon DeVivo.
Thank you so much, Angela. Appreciate all the help and support that you and your team provide to the task force. And good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you all, even though it's not in person. Really thrilled to have us all back together. And thank you so much for your service to the task force. So to get things started, I hope you've all had an opportunity to review the minutes. If I could please have a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll motion to accept.
Thank you, Yvette.
I'll second.
Terrific. Thank Brett. Yes, thank you, Brett, for the second. All in favor, please put your hand up. Any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, terrific. All right, so, this is, it's starting to feel more hopeful. The green shoots of aviation and aerospace coming back. I can feel it. I sit across the street from LaGuardia Airport and I feel the rumbles, and that's a really good thing. And our career services office at the institution where I work has started to get more and more requests for jobs. So I think we're starting to see the fruits of the industry coming back, which is really exciting and makes our work even more important, and will really fill an important hole, once we're able to put our recommendations and provide those to the FAA and to Congress next year. So we're excited today to hear updates from all of our subcommittees. I know you've all been working really hard in terms of your individual charges, and excited for everybody to hear the progress that's being made. We're also going to have a couple of presentations, as we typically do. The FAA coming to talk to us about social media and how they're reaching out to build awareness, particularly in young people and underrepresented groups, using social media, which is, meeting them where they're at. We're going to hear about a new entrant into the flight training business. Many airlines have been at this for several years. The latest one has made a pledge to underrepresented groups. We're excited to hear about how they got to that place. And then also the military's approach to diversifying their workforce and being sure to attract young people to fill the mission that they have. So with that, why don't we get started with our first subcommittee update, which is Yvette Rose. Yvette.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate the introduction and your leadership on this team. It's a pleasure to be part of the task force. And as Sharon mentioned, I chair the Trend Subcommittee. So we wanted to provide the group and the public an update since our last public meeting on March 31st. So since March, our subcommittee's been meeting, and before I get into the presentation, maybe the next slide, please, because that's just going to list who our members are. I really want to acknowledge all our team members. We just have a really great group. I've learned so much from each of them, and an acknowledgement of our FAA subject matter experts who have been on our calls every week, adding their input, helping guide us. And we were just really encouraged after our last public meeting, and and the survey results. And, if you'll recall, we had, sort of identified many trends and some of kind of what we already knew and what we had talked about as a collective group in aviation, but it certainly solidified a lot of what we're thinking and helps us on a path forward. So these are the members of our subcommittee on this slide here. Next slide, please. This is our task, again, just to remind the group of what our subcommittee was tasked with. We're going to identify industry trends that encourage or discourage youth in the United States from pursuing careers in aviation. Next slide, please. Oh, now that was quick. I was only going to cover the first 3 slides, so I am very happy to turn it over to my other subcommittee team members. Casey Herzberg is not here with us today, unfortunately, but Brett Levanto and Sid Smith are going to cover, and I'll pick up a little later. So I'm going to turn it over to Brett.
Thanks, Yvette. So this is a bit of a recap, of functional update in terms of what the subcommittee's been doing and how it's been doing it. We've been meeting weekly, as Yvette mentioned. Our FAA SMEs have been right there with us every step of the way, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of providing a little bit of direction and insight in terms of the work the agency is doing internally to support workforce and career development, and also to provide just good institutional knowledge and a little bit of pacing to the work that we've been doing. Those meetings, one key, not change, but evolution since our report of our first public meeting, is that we've been bringing in a lot more external insight into those discussions. So we've met with particularly friends at the Smithsonian to talk about efforts going on in training teachers, and a couple other opportunities for engagement externally to talk with entities that are doing work that falls into the spirit of the subcommittee's work. And that work, as we'll highlight in just a minute, is pivoting to focus on gathering information from educators. And in a second, I'm gonna pass it over to Sid. She's going to give some background on the value of teachers that we've learned about, the impact of educators, and why that's important. And so what we've been doing is, particularly through that kind of outreach with the Smithsonian and other input that we're getting, is developing some ways that we can engage with different individuals who are in the education field so that we can learn about their work and the impact it has on students. And so if you show us the next slide, I'll pass things over to our friend Sid, and she'll talk a little bit about the value of educators.
Good morning, everyone. Again, it is great to be on this task force, and it's just been awesome working with the committee and the committee members of the Trends Committee. So since our last couple of meetings, we've done a deeper dive into the role that teachers can play in growing aviation aerospace awareness in schools. From the student survey, we gained significant information which confirmed the importance of the role of teachers from the earlier years and throughout a student's academic journey. Ideally, teachers are a great support base. So first of all, it is our teachers who are working with the target group every day. They impact, inspire, influence countless young people every single day. So when we talk about the importance of building a student pipeline, teachers are crucial to advocating the pipeline philosophy. Secondly, as we consider ways to engage parents, it is our teachers who already have a built-in partnership with parents. Lastly, and equally important, is the relationship that teachers have with other teachers. For instance, the institute that the Smithsonian has during the summer that Brett just mentioned, the Teachers Innovative Institute, it allows teachers to gain knowledge to teach their students about aerospace. Teachers are then able to mentor other teachers as well as to encourage those teachers to participate in the program. So teachers are key to igniting student interest in aviation, engaging them in hands-on activities, as well as promoting aviation career awareness. With that being said, it is imperative, we feel, to capitalize on the multiple connections that teachers bring. So the Trends Committee will be developing a survey for teachers only to gain feedback on their aviation awareness and support that can be provided for our teachers. And Brett will elaborate on the survey.
Well, one of the points that we learned as we were doing the initial work that we reported on in the first public meeting was not just led us to the value of educators in general, but also provided us a lot of insight in terms of the help that they need. So the feedback that we got on behalf of teachers and counselors was, for lack of a better term, a sense of confusion or ignorance, not in a mean-spirited way, but just lack of knowledge in terms of aviation fields and opportunities. It's a complex industry. It can be intimidating, and hopefully not so much so when you're inside of it, but certainly when you're looking at it from the outside. And when guidance counselors or teachers or those inside educational environments who have a direct impact on students don't necessarily feel comfortable with the details of an industry or what pathways may be available or how a student can succeed if they decide to pursue it, then they're just naturally not going to provide as strong a guidance or information about opportunities as they would otherwise. And that's something that there are entities out there, particularly the Smithsonian's work that we've learned about, that are addressing or providing mechanisms to support teachers in providing that kind of influence. But it's an opportunity where we can really multiply the impact just by providing some baseline knowledge about pathways and different areas of the industry or key connections for those who might want to learn, so that when students are in a pool of opportunity where they could go into aviation or aviation-like fields, that counselors and teachers have that information. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit of information about what those key conclusions look like. The first one is focusing on formative years for students. So as a bit of a recap from our last public presentation, we got some really interesting information from what we called our youth survey, but we learned in administering it that youth was a bit of a misnomer. And that came out of the fact that we asked a question as to when respondents, who were primarily students engaged in aviation training programs, so that group of individuals who have already self-identified as being interested or pursuing aviation through education, we wanted to know what it was that was driving them. And we asked at what age they became interested in aviation. And it's worth noting that the ages, while the incidence of numbers reported did decrease as the ages got older, they actually stretched all the way up to 49 in our respondent pool, with most of the years represented between 10 or younger and almost 50. And we thought that was really interesting because it demonstrated opportunities for lifelong engagement and individuals who may have had other careers or worked in similar industries to be able to pivot into aviation education. But we also saw these two standout years at ages 10 and 18. And that was really instructive for us because those two kind of tent poles within a student or a developing individual's lifespan give us some important insight onto what might have inspired them in those particular areas. So when you're thinking down at age 10, that's more of our bread and butter kind of inspiration, the excitement of aviation and interest in cool and interesting and developing technology that you can nurture through STEM education and engagement with the industry and grow those inspired individuals into somebody who can pursue careers in aviation. As they're older, towards that 18 tent post, things are just a little bit different. Certainly, we all like to believe that aviation remains inspiring, but an 18-year-old, particularly one that comes down one of our pathways, is probably thinking in very practical ways about their future and development. There are career opportunities that can be clearly communicated within our industry, but I'm also a big fan of being willing to admit, particularly as someone speaking on behalf of maintenance and engineering, that you can get someone into great pathways that are aviation focused and even inform them that they're going to develop skills that could be really advantageous to them outside of aviation. And that's a great actually selling point that we can take advantage of. So those formative years and understanding the value and style of engagement at different points over the aging of a student or a prospective aviator or professional in our industry are really important for understanding our work. We also do recognize, as we've heard in many venues, the value of engaging with underserved communities and understanding a broad range of potential educational tracks that go beyond the four-year education flow through a four-year university. So community colleges provide shorter opportunities for education that transitions into employment. Historically Black colleges and universities and other entities focused on different unreached or unengaged groups in our industry provide opportunities for us to be able to communicate with key subgroups in this effort. And also in terms of the how, Sid is actually going to jump in and kind of close us out on these details, because she brought some great insight to our group regarding online platforms because of these tools being used to engage with students. And so I actually will happily pass it back to her so she can talk to us a little bit about those.
Okay. All right. So the online platforms, well, college and career readiness databases such as the Naviance, Career Zone, Zello, Career Connect, these are definitely platforms that are being used by students, by parents, by guidance counselors, and others. And they are great tools. However, these platforms usually have hundreds of different careers to explore. And we just want to make sure that aviation isn't lost in the search there. So as a committee, we are actually investigating the relevance of a national aviation aerospace only college and career database. We think this would be very helpful. It's similar to like a one-stop shop where kids can actually research everything about aviation and aerospace only. So we are excited about a little more investigation there, and definitely think that that can be important for students, families, as well as educators. And then general online research is always important, and using the internet searches. There are great things that can be revealed when we're using internet searches, as well as social media. It's very important to stay abreast of some of the social media networks that are available. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Yvette.
Thank you so much, team. You guys did a great job recapping where we've been since March, what we've been doing. Next slide, please. So as our next steps in terms of a subcommittee, just our process, as Brett mentioned, we're going to work on developing an educator surveys. And I say two, because I think our target audience is not necessarily or not only educators that already have had some training awareness, whether they participated in some of these teacher institutes or summer camps, for want of a better word, some sort of additional aviation awareness. That's one population of teachers that we want to target. But then obviously another population are those teachers that have no awareness or are, don't understand all the career opportunities and all the different pathways there are to get into aviation aerospace. We also, obviously continue to work with the other subcommittees. There is, a little overlap here. While this subcommittee is sort of charged with identifying those trends, digging a little deeper into some of those, it certainly goes into the work of the other subcommittees. And I think you'll see that sort of flow through today's meeting. So we're going to continue to work with the other subcommittees. And I think that's great, because the more heads we get together thinking about this, the more brainstorming we can do is going to be helpful as we develop and formulate our recommendations. Next slide, please. Questions from the task force. Happy to field any questions.
I have a question, of course.
Sure.
So have you all talked at all about, how do we, every state has its own education department. I love the work with teachers. I think that's terrific. So have you talked at all about how do you translate to 50 different states with 50 different rules about the value of aviation and aerospace? Or are you just thinking, we should do something at the national level and the states will figure it out? Have you talked at all about how do we tackle the 50 different state problem?
Yeah, it's definitely curriculum requirements that vary. And I don't think we're really talking about, and there are organizations out there like, the AOPA curriculum that's trying to influence some of the requirements in education. I think for us, it's more of an awareness tool. It's not a formalized approach. I think that you can still gain a lot from even, a 2-week exposure. There's things that you can do so that the teacher is in their mind, maybe incorporating something in aviation with their regular lesson plans, or just if there's, I just think, as Brett mentioned, there is a lack of awareness of the many career opportunities and the need that we have in aviation for young people. And we need that, pipeline. And Sid's been doing some of that work firsthand. She'll report out, today I did a lesson plan and focused it on aviation without necessarily.
No time.
So,
Yeah. That's
great.
perfect. Great. Joe, go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks. Great presentation. Intrigued by a few things. The age 10 and the age 18 as standouts, and more excited about the older, more heads up, self-selected, because the world can look so big at age 10, but you've probably started making it more narrowly focusing the lens by age 18. The career and college readiness is a really fresh approach. I looked at Naviance, for example, and what I found, and I'm curious what you found from the other sites too, when you're trying to find aviation related careers, it doesn't look like there are the appropriate categories. I find hospitality, tourism, transportation, and logistics. And so are you finding that across the board at programs like Naviance, where they don't even have aviation, or it seems to be something like you have to select aerospace engineering, which really isn't the same thing? I'm just curious if you could talk more about the career and college readiness idea.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think you're picking up on it. I'm going to actually turn it over to Sid because I think she can respond more directly to that question.
Okay. Yes, that's exactly what we are seeing as well. And something we've talked about is maybe even having a partnership with Naviance or some of those career readiness platforms so that there is a better presentation and guiding those platforms on how to represent aviation a little better on their sites. And again, this is why we think it is important and want to continue to research the relevance of a national database that will house aviation and aerospace information only. Again, it's so easy for kids to not research or know how to get to aviation aerospace specific information. So we are definitely on the same page there and really feel that it's important to have that national database.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, on another point, like you're required to use Naviance as even grade 5, right, Sid, in some states, some districts, by grade middle school, right?
Yes, as a part of our career program, we are using Naviance in our elementary schools.
So, and parents, certainly in the high school age, for those that have high school kids, they know, I mean, you're on it all the time. It's the only way you really can communicate with counselors in some districts to get, recommendation letters, transcripts, et cetera. So it's a tool that's not only useful, but required, and the place students go to explore career and, secondary, post-secondary education.
Joey?
This is actually a follow-up to your question, Sharon. I was just going to say that a couple years ago, I participated in a workforce development day with the National Association of State Aviation Officials. And so at the state level, that might be an interesting way to do outreach to state education and workforce development because they've got it, that NASEO has, does do that outreach. I'm sure it varies by state director, but it might be an interesting idea to explore.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, the other thing I was to add to that is we're just learning about this. Burning Glass is a career site that allows you can search on particular industries and see all the open jobs and salary as well. I'm thinking about the 18-year-olds, not the 10-year-olds. That might be another place that we could possibly suggest partnerships with. There are probably others. I'm sorry if I feel like on the cooking shows where you're supposed to hide the label. I just know that, organizations and institutions are starting to use those at the front end to give students a sense on the return on investment, right? Because that's what families are asking for in terms of higher education costs. So, yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, mine kind of went along the same lines, Sharon. I wasn't aware of this Burning Glass, but we are developing at AAR several programs with colleges across the country. And one of the things that I know the Aviation Technician Education Council, ATEC, had been working on through the Department of Labor is the classification of maintenance technicians as one. I know we're looking at more broadly, but I wonder, as we think about trends, and I don't know if you guys have had Department of Labor conversations, but how are they classifying these aviation-based careers? Is there a way when you go on the BLS data that it could be, hey, I'm looking for aviation, and maybe they all show up together, pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, all the different role in aerospace engineers, et cetera. But I know that, at one point in time, and we got the Department of Labor to really look at this, was that, they were showing like the amount of jobs on the aviation maintenance side was like 1% growth. It's now 5% growth. And I question whether that's even accurate at all. So when you're a school or a parent or a teacher looking at, the BLS data, and it doesn't really show a very high growth, you may also lend yourself to maybe, choose to go to different careers. And so just an observation I thought of, Yvette and the team, as we're looking at trends, that might be another thing. And maybe you have looked at Department of Labor, but I just wanted to bring that up also.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I recall that effort, so I appreciate you bringing that up. It could be something that is a good starting point, because if that isn't set, if the classifications are off, then that's going to trickle down into, barriers to entry.
Right. And the Career Zone platform actually has some of that information when you are looking at different careers. They would give you the outlook percentage on jobs. However, you've given us some good homework in reaching out to the Department of Labor, but the Career Zones is also a database that is in different states. I don't know if it's in every state, but for example, we have PA Career Zone, and I know that there are many other states that also have the Career Zone platform.
Terrific. Ralph.
Hi, Ryan brought up Department of Labor, and I'd like to follow up on that. The Department of Labor established a partnership with the National Defense Industry Association and the Aerospace Industry Association, and they developed over quite a few years an aerospace competencies model. And that model details all of the aerospace jobs that they were able to identify, ranging from engineers to maintenance technicians and everything in between. It's a rather extensive interactive model that details all of the requirements for every single job and all of the expectations for those jobs. So if anyone is interested in understanding what aerospace jobs are all about and what they involve in terms of requirements and expectations and the competencies that are required for each of those jobs, it's all detailed on the Department of Labor site.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Trends Subcommittee? Okay, great work. Thank you so much, Yvette, Sid, and Brett. You're making tremendous progress. Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
appreciate it.
Okay, up next is funding, and I will hand it over to Ralph.
Thanks, Sharon. I'd like to thank Sharon and Angela for their leadership on this task force. Without their leadership, we wouldn't be able to make the kind of progress that we're making. And so special thanks to both of you because we really appreciate it. We're going to talk about funding now, and let's go to the next slide. We established an agenda for our section of the presentation. And what we're going to go into is some background information. We're going to identify gaps in traditional funding sources. We've done a fair amount of research on traditional funding. And so this is really going to be more of an overview. We're going to look at our initial ideas, which hopefully will lead to recommendations. We're going to focus in on two elements at a relatively high level. We're looking at funding for individuals and funding for programs. And then we're going to explain the recommendations and open it up for questions and answers. Let's go to the next slide. These are the members of our subcommittee, so I'd like to introduce everybody. Each of the core members are going to be doing part of the presentation. So we have Tamara Holmes, who's founder and CEO of Aerostar Consulting Corporation and Aerostar Avian Institute. John Huff, who's Vice President of Human Resources at HAECO Americas. David Purser, aviation instructor, physics instructor at Carnes City High School. And then we have our FAA advisors, Joni Christian and Michelle Christensen. Let's go to the next slide. Click again. And I'd like to turn this over to Tamara.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present. We are, as a funding committee, really looking at what funding means for access to youth for American jobs in aviation. We identified 3 gaps in traditional funding sources. The first one is loans. Loans are a really good source, of course, of education and training when it comes to college degrees, when it comes to being able to pay for training. But what we found is that in the way the current loan system is set up, of course, loans must be repaid, which has been shown to be more of an issue for underserved and underrepresented communities to pay back and repay loans. And as a matter of fact, currently college debt for that has been taken out for universities is one of the highest loans and deficits that Americans have and hold even throughout their adulthood and career. Is interest accruing. So we're looking at ways to increase or decrease the amount of interest that accrues on loans. Qualification requirements for loans vary by the loan providers, but they also have a very disproportionate and negative outcome based on underrepresented borrowers. So a lot of times when we're looking to target a more diverse and more inclusive education and training access to funding, we find that those individuals who actually need the loans either do not qualify or have a hard time repaying those loans. The next gap in traditional funding is scholarships. So scholarships are great. You can progress the slide for me, please. Scholarships are great. They offer a huge opportunity for young people to be able to have access to funding on an individual basis. But these scholarships, as the Trends Committee talked about, even with having the access to know what's out there when it comes to aviation and aerospace, the same thing happens in scholarships. They're really difficult to locate. There's no centralized database in the US, a national database for aviation scholarships. You can find a lot of different pockets of information, but the reality is, if you want to find a scholarship, you really have to be plugged into a lot of the organizations or even a member of a lot of the organizations that are providing these funding sources for scholarships. They usually offer one-time support. It's very seldom that students get recurring scholarships. That usually comes in a lump sum that they're able to use and spend towards particular things. And even in some cases where you have double scholarships, you cannot stack that money. So I know students who have scholarship money for tuition and fees from ROTC plus from financial aid, and they could not use those other fundings, the other funding sources for anything outside of tuition and fees. So scholarship money doesn't offer a variety of applications when it comes to what you actually need to pay for. And of course, when it comes to aviation education and training, we definitely need scholarships that focus specifically on funding that goes directly towards training that leads to licenses, credentials, and certifications. They are highly competitive. Now, this is a really good thing. This is a really good thing for scholarships to be highly competitive. But what we've seen when it comes to aviation and aerospace education and training, there are a lot of students who don't perform well academically. Let's say B average. Most scholarships require above a 3.0 GPA. And so while we're looking to create a more diverse and more inclusive and a robust aviation talent pipeline, we really should be looking at the gaps that exist when it comes to being able to have competitive scholarships, but also have it equitable. And the last thing is dependent on philanthropic giving. As we all know, people give from their heartstrings. And so most aviation scholarships are funded by people that are in the aviation industry, that love the aviation industry, or organizations that support aviation initiatives. What we are looking at based on philanthropic giving, most of the philanthropic giving in the United States of America is given towards religious organizations and organizations that people feel a deep connection to. Philanthropic giving is not a way that we can really depend on to get a substantial amount of funding in the hands of young people who need to pursue a specific pathway in aviation and aerospace education. And the last gap that we identified in traditional funding sources are grants. Grants are also a really good way. If you could progress the slide for me, please. Grants are also a really good way of providing lump sums of funding to organizations that deliver services, i.e. aviation and aerospace education and training initiatives. But they also have, on a wider scale, little aviation focus for grants that are available today. The FAA, we were really happy to learn last year, released 2 grants for aviation maintenance technicians and aviation and pilots. But those were 2 grants that we're looking at actually being able to build upon, because there's still a small population of the grant funding that's out there specifically for aviation education and training initiatives. Grants actually also have a low success rate. We have seen a lot of issues with grant reporting, with being able to track metrics, create logic models that actually line up with the deliverables and the outcomes of that grant funding. And then at the end of that grant, they really have not seen the impact that they thought they would see at the inception and implementation of that program in many cases. And we have evidence to support that. And these are also highly competitive, which means a lot of smaller organizations cannot compete with larger organizations who are going after significant amounts of grant funding, like TRIO grants, like Department of Education grants, or grants that come from larger philanthropic institutions. Really look for more established organizations to give grants to, but that also creates a playing field for smaller nonprofits who are in the aviation space to not be able to acquire the funding that they need to provide the services like education training that we talked about in trends, like those exposure initiatives. There are a lot of grassroots organizations on the ground that are doing that work, that don't necessarily have grant opportunities that are substantial to feed the long-term prospects of pipeline development. And the last one that's a gap in grants is the robust tracking and evaluation, which I touched on a little bit earlier. But when it comes to grant awards, the amount of tracking and evaluation that needs to take place in order to be able to not only get the grant, but sustain the grant. And a lot of smaller organizations just really don't have the capacity to do the robust tracking and evaluation. So these are the three things that three gaps in traditional funding that we identified. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ralph.
Thanks, Tamara. Great job. I'd like to talk about the funding requirements needed to impact the aerospace workforce. So Tamara outlined very, very cogently the issues that we have with traditional funding. So what do we need to do from that point on to address the aerospace workforce? Well, first of all, we believe that the funding needs to be national. In order to really impact the workforce, it has to be available to people across the country. Second, as Tamara mentioned in the gaps that traditional funding provide, one of the issues we identified was that the funding needs to be ongoing. So it can't be just a one-shot infusion. It has to be ongoing in order to be able to impact the workforce. The third element is that, as Tamara also pointed out, much of the existing and traditional funding is not targeted to aerospace or aviation in any way. There are small elements that are. Tamara pointed to two grants that were aviation specific, but most of the vast majority of grants available are not aviation specific. So we believe that that funding needs to be targeted to aerospace education in order to be able to impact that workforce. And then lastly, the results need to be tied to increasing the numbers of people interested in aerospace, and also to increase the numbers of people going into the aerospace workforce. So that's a kind of an overview of what we believe needs to be a set of requirements in order to actually impact the workforce, which is what our goal is. Let's go to the next slide, please. Click again. I'd like to turn this over to David.
Thank you, Ralph. All our recommendations are both individual and private. So what I'm going to do is highlight the details of specific points of our recommendations, and then further we'll go into those even deeper in the remaining few minutes. But our proposed loan forgiveness program is both for public school teachers, private as well, and students alike that will be supporting aerospace programs. We're going to outline a general airline fee to generate dollars. And I know this proposes a little bit of controversy, but the fee is listed as a tax. Maybe that's a pejorative of terms. Maybe we look at it as a checkoff. And I'm reminded of the 1985 Farm Bill. I am a teacher and live in South Texas. I'm also a cattle rancher. And the 1985 Farm Bill had a checkoff that was $1 per head of cattle. Cattle is singular and plural. And every producer offered that $1 per head, and 80% of all of the agricultural participants supported that program that went to education in schools, research and development, agriculture, and it did a lot to boost the industry itself. And it's ongoing today still from 1985. So maybe we don't look at what we call it, but we look at what it can do. We're also going to talk about one of our largest funding sources would be 0.25% off the congressional budgets that are obtained. And all of this we're going to discuss further before we finish with John and Tamara. But more important, these fundings are based on a rubric. I couldn't be a teacher without bringing to attention what a rubric is. And it's a way to take a subjective evaluation and make it more objective. We do have that built in to those that would receive the funding, whatever the sources may be. And we have a tier system that will also be discussed. And a lot of this is more in detail in the appendix, and Ralph will talk about that as well. But this tier system will allow a bracket system showing your success as you receive that money. Maybe it's a upper tier system with a lot more money coming to you, or a lower tier system with lesser money coming to you. But all of that is based on the success of your program. Ralph?
Could you click again, please? And so this is the second part of what David was addressing. Let's go to the next slide, please. One more. There we go. So I'd like to now turn it over to John to discuss this element of what we're looking at as our initial idea.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. I appreciate the opportunity to present some ideas that our subcommittee has been discussing, and knowing that it takes a lot more research and a lot more discussion before any type of recommendations are finalized and made. We have had some really good discussion and some good ideas that we've been looking at that might increase the number of young people entering the aerospace industry. We recognize these ideas do require quite a bit of discussion and do have some level of controversy at times, but we think that they're worth pursuing as just two sources of potential funding. And the first idea, as you can see here, would be to create a loan forgiveness program modeled on similar programs that exist today. And I think that if we'll go to the next slide, the idea, as we discussed, we felt like delivering funding through a loan program directly to students pursuing aerospace careers with forgiveness after a multi-year commitment might be a way to make these career paths more attractive, especially for more costly programs. The funding for the programs, as David alluded to earlier, might be achievable by the introduction of a 10-cent tax on each airline ticket sold in the U.S. That program could be administered by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Federal Student Aid. And if you'll go to the next slide, and as you can see by this example, if you'll click and then click again, one more time, you will see that this revenue generated from this potential ticket tax could be possibly up to $105 million or more based on travel patterns in the U.S. during normal years. So the funding source here might be a good way to take a look at a source that's different from what we do today. And we understand it may be controversial, but we believe that this direct approach with individuals wanting to pursue the aviation and aerospace industry as a career path, again, it has to be not only from a public or a program point of view, educational point of view, but also an individual pathway would be important to include. So I'll turn it back over to Ralph on the next slide to discuss another possible approach.
So the second initial idea that we're focused on is something that we mentioned last time, but I'd like to give you a high-level overview again here. It's an incentive-based funding solution and proposed legislation. So we're looking at the U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Department of Transportation appropriation legislation should include 0.25% or 1/4% in budgets of all aerospace contracts with the DoD and DOT to be used for aerospace education programs that actually demonstrate that they lead to jobs in aerospace and in the defense workforce. The proposed legislative modification is designed to connect corporate funders and programs to work collaboratively to address the aerospace workforce need by providing incentives to both groups. To be eligible for the funding, the aerospace education and training programs need to show how they address the aerospace workforce diversity needs and shortages. The 1/4% of aerospace education and training programs should be included in the existing contract budget. So here, there wouldn't be adding any additional new money to the budget. Let's go to the next slide, please. Click again, and again, this is something that Tamara's going to be discussing.
Thanks, Ralph. So what we have proposed as a recommendation, we're looking at 0.25 to 0.25% of DO. Can you go back one slide? Because this is, okay, there we go. What we're initially proposing is to look at 0.25% of the Department of Defense's average annual spending in aerospace defense contracts only. So this is not the entirety of the Department of Defense. This is only contracts that are aerospace and defense contracts. The total approximate budget for contract spending is $200 billion, and 0.25% of that would be $500 million that would be available for subcontracting opportunities for aviation and aerospace education annually. One of the reasons why this is so important is because we wanted to show, again, as Ralph mentioned, this is not new funding. It's new funding for aerospace education, but this is not an additional $500 million on top of DOD and DOD contracts. If you can go to the next slide. If we duplicate this idea in aviation and aerospace contracts on the Department of Transportation, again, the total amount average of the contracts in aerospace for the Department of Transportation with 0.25% would be an additional number of millions of dollars. We are still looking for an average number for the Department of Transportation aerospace contracts, but we really wanted to extrapolate the idea from the two organizations within the US government that are contracting specifically in the area where we are looking to employ the future youth of America. And this is why this recommendation was so important to us, because if we look at who has a lot to benefit from the funding of aviation and aerospace education, is absolutely the organizations that are doing the hiring and will be doing the hiring. And so we're really looking forward to digging deeper into the numbers of contracting and exploring how these particular recommendations could be used to increase the funding available for aerospace education on an annual basis. This actually meets the gap also for us being able to find lump sums of money specifically for aviation and aerospace education, longer term commitment for those funding sources. And it will still be competitive, but it will be competitive in a way that that lends itself towards an equal playing field when applying for these funds. Ralph?
Thank you. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Tamara. And so all of this begs the question of how will the companies identify education programs? So we're suggesting that that there be an aerospace education list established that would be self-generated by the education programs. So we've developed a set of criteria to evaluate how education programs are impacting the aerospace workforce. And based on those criteria, programs will be placed on the aerospace education program list, which we're calling the list for shorthand. The list will have 3 tiers based on aerospace education program workforce outcomes that result in getting students into the aerospace workforce. You have to remember, our primary goal is not simply to educate people, but it's to educate people and then get them into the aerospace workforce. So that last piece can't be forgotten, because that's the primary reason why we're implementing this task force. So that's a critical element. Programs must enter data used to evaluate the program's contribution to the aerospace workforce in order to be placed on the list. So there's an incentive for the programs to be able to enter the data, because if we had to hire people to research all of this across the country, it would be very expensive and very laborious. But if the programs do it themselves, and then the incentive is that they can then, once they're on the list, be eligible for funding through subcontracts, that's motivation for them to enter the data themselves. So the company funders can then identify the programs that contribute to the aerospace workforce and recruit the programs, be part of the company's responses to RFPs, and then be part of the contribution. And so if the criteria that are established would also be a requirement for the companies to get their contracts, that's an incentive for the companies to actually want to be able to include these programs into their subcontracts. Because if it gives them an extra few points, that can make the difference between whether they get a large contract, and that's what their primary business is. So what we're doing is aligning the vectors of self-interest among the programs and the companies to work collaboratively to solve the problem together. And that's another kind of problem that we've been looking at. So in terms of our next steps, we're planning on testing our ideas with industry and with Congress, because we know we've had some discussion about the ideas. There have been various points of view, some positive, some negative, but we want to address all of the comments, and we want to test them with the key constituent groups that are going to be most affected by these kinds of ideas or recommendations. We also want to collaborate with the other subcommittees, both on the Youth Task Force and the Women's Board, to make sure we're in alignment with what the other groups are proposing. We want to work collaboratively with the other groups on the Youth Task Force to work on developing the report and other materials that have to be developed. And of course, we're going to be continuing our research as we progress through the rest of the period. And now I'd like to open it up for questions and see what people have to say.
Terrific. Thank you, Ralph. So it occurred to me while we were talking, and I don't think we've discussed this yet in terms of the vetting the ideas process. It might also be helpful to talk to somebody, and if there's anybody in the public that's has any thoughts on this, please reach out to Angela Anderson. We'd love to have your ideas, or if you're with any of the organizations that represent these industries and you have some ideas, love to hear them. Is the National Defense Industries Association, NDIA?
Yes.
So that's where all the aerospace manufacturers are, a lot of them. And, you know, that might be another place to go and vet. I mean, we've talked about Airlines for Americas. We've talked about, you know, talking to someone at DOT. I think the National Defense Industries Association might be a good one. The Aerospace Industries Association is another good one. Any suggestions from the task force about others that we should talk to in terms of vetting the idea? I think we want to get as broad a representation as we can. I'm not saying we only want to present ideas that are absolutely doable. I think it would be okay in the end to have some moonshots, right? We're not there yet, but I think particularly in terms of funding, we don't want to suggest something that is not possible, and we want to know that early.
Sharon, I would throw RAA out as well, the Regional Airline Association.
Yes.
I think that, you know, A4A is great for the major level, but the RAA certainly has a strong voice and a lot of good input as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, if you don't know Faye, happy to connect you. That's true, and they've been thinking about this for a while. So, yeah, good point. Yeah, John, go ahead.
So I agree with your comments. I do think that there's a recurring theme that I'm hearing as we've had discussions, and that's the need for some type of central location for students, for educators, program administrators, basically the providers and the people wanting the development and training to get to the industry. It seems like that portal or some central location keeps coming up. And I think that then there is the question of how is that funded and how is that sustainable beyond this task force's time? So I think that that would be something that our group should definitely take a look at. And I also think that we probably need to hear some more final recommendations from the various subcommittees before some of the recommendations from this committee could really be finalized, because there may be ideas that come out of the various groups that would generate a need for funding that might not be along the lines of what we've already talked about.
Yeah, great point, John. That's part of why we do these, right? Is so that we can regularly check in and give each other updates. And as we get closer to more, less fact finding and more, this is what we are thinking, I think that will become clearer as we move through the process. So thank you. Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, just two questions. So one of the things that I've noticed in a couple of meetings that we've had with the FAA is just this tremendous interest in the FAA grant program that was created out of the FAA Reauthorization Act. Over 300 plus applications for this $5 million grant program. And I think what's interesting is Ralph, as you were speaking and the team about these various, how does the money come in? I think what's really, I think that's one very important component, but having this system in place that's very aviation centric, that ties industry, education, labor together through a grant program could be where the money ultimately ends up, right? Is an idea that I thought that could be vetted further, because I know, we're in the, we're really pushing on the legislative side to make sure that it gets appropriated, and clearly I think the need is greater than the 5 million that was put in there. So I just kind of bring that to the team as some thoughts. But my second question is, I haven't heard anything about the loan program through Title IV and whether or not modifications could be made to it.
Ryan, just say that again. Did you say Title IV?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was just wondering.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just wondering about the current loan program and whether or not you've examined it and whether or not there could be some small modifications to it to allow for one, either an increase in the amount of funding you can get, and number two, whether or not some of those, as Tamara talked about, some of the challenges with credit could be lowered based upon being in aviation programs. And I just didn't know if you guys had looked at that at all yet either.
Let me respond to Ryan's questions, and other members of the team jump in if you have other things to add. So first of all, let me start with the second one first, because I think it's really interesting question and perspective. We did look at what the Department of Education has already in place, and they have two primary programs that they're doing for loan forgiveness currently. One is focused on not-for-profits, and the other is focused on teaching in low-income or rural areas. So those programs are in place and have been in place for a long time. So we use those as a model for what we're trying to do. Our approach was to add some additional money to that, and that this would be a third element. Our loan forgiveness would be a third element in that Department of Education initiative that would be added to that portfolio. So rather than carve money out of those two existing programs, we're suggesting that additional money be added, and a new dimension that would be aviation specific would be added to that Department of Education program. And it would be able to support individuals in things like pilot training, maintenance technician training, or engineering, or other things that would be relevant. Currently, the Department of Education loan forgiveness doesn't have any area of opportunity for aviation. It's focused on not-for-profits and also for teachers. So those are good programs, and the model seems to be working. It's been around for a long time. But again, we're hoping to see more of a focus on aviation in order to impact the aviation workforce. I agree with the idea that we need to be, let's go to the first question that you raised, because this is an interesting question also. The second idea that we're working on would bring industry and also education together to work collaboratively. I think that's really an important dimension to solving the problem, because right now what we have is a patchwork of grants and other funding opportunities that are not working in any way to support aerospace or aviation education. There are some very nice little bright spots, and we've all pointed to the two $5 million grant programs that the FAA has, and those are really great bright spots. But the problem is that right now those two grant opportunities are too small to have an impact on the workforce. While they are focused very much on aviation and they're great, they're not big enough to really have an impact on the workforce at large on a broad basis. So what we want to do is really focus on expanding that kind of opportunity so more people can engage in getting the kind of resources that they need. And we also, at the same time, want to get the communities working together, because a lot of the work has been done in patchworks across the country. And, you know, you can add it all up, but they're not working collaboratively. So it's like herding cats. There are vectors going in all different directions, and they're not aligned to support aviation or aerospace education. And so our goal is to try and get those vectors aligned so that we're all working on the same common goal. And that's another major challenge that I think we're trying to address.
So Ralph, Ryan, thanks, Ralph. Ryan, I just wanted to add, and I know you and I know this very well. We've been working together for years, doing this exact same thing, and funding is probably the biggest missing piece, even with the work that we're doing. So one of the things that we know can be transformative with the proposed approach of employer contracting, partnering with organizations, is what we do is a model between Aerostar and AAR. But what we also have discovered is that the relationship building is probably the biggest part of the pipeline towards employment, right? And so when you have employers that are engaged with training and education organizations like ATEC with the universities, you create an environment where you can actually seed, water, and grow relationships, and those employees from now, we're talking based on trends from 10 years old, right? If we start that young, we literally can start planting those seeds and growing organically our own aviation employees through corporate structure, through philanthropy, through universities and academic institutions. And that allows for those vectors to start aligning, not just based on where the money is coming from, but where the jobs are, where the passion is, where the interests are, and where the students meet the employer is basically where the employer actually needs to fill gaps in their pipeline. And so as we talk about youth access to jobs, aviation jobs in America, the jobs are where we probably need to start, right? The jobs are where we need to start. And if we can fund the people that are looking for jobs and give them the resources they need to go out and train their employees the way they want them, the Eagle Pathways program is an extraordinary example of leading people as an employer directly into the pipeline to get hired for you. And I think that's what's the most beautiful part of the recommendation, is that it's creating, like Ralph said, those vectors that are not just aligned financially, but they're aligned through corporate culture, through corporate interests, and also through corporate human resources needs. And that comes directly from the employer, and the education organizations do not have to try to figure out, like the Trends Committee mentioned earlier, you can't even find a category for aviation jobs. But if you're working with an employer and they tell you we need a structural engineering and aerospace design inspector, we make those. Just go out and make them, because that job doesn't exist in a portfolio somewhere that has a list of aviation jobs. And that goes the same thing for, we talked about concrete and we talked about other things earlier. All of that's aviation. Noise abatement, people have, it's $1 billion industry, but who actually knows that I can go into aviation aircraft noise and Part 150 studies? That's not a part of a job description anywhere. And I think those are just examples of how the aviation industry is so robust. And I think if we get caught up into funding pilots and mechanics, the industry is going to suffer long-term, because the need for employment opportunities for young people is going to be exacerbated exponentially over the next 10 years. And COVID literally just bought us some time.
Okay.
Ryan, I actually agree with a couple of the points that you made, and Tamara, I agree with you as well. I do think that there should be some further exploration of grants and also loan programs that exist today to see what can be enhanced, and maybe are there some ways to improve those. One of the challenges I think that came out of our discussions was also the sustainability for, especially for smaller organizations, to be able to predict what they might expect in grants, especially on an ongoing basis, because to be able to do a lot of these programs, it requires a long-term view, not just what can we do in the next 6 months. So, but I agree with you. I think you had some good points.
So I have a question. David, I think you can help me out with this, being a teacher. I know if you talk with any teacher, of course, they're going to say that they need funding for resources. So what has been your discussion on making sure that that the funding is easily accessible for classrooms or for a teacher who's definitely trying to promote aviation and aerospace in a classroom?
Well, right now, our funding problem has been flying students. We have a 4-year program. We just expanded it to 5 years. We now offer it to 7th and 8th graders. Our junior, senior level are actually flying students. Our senior level is instrument rating. At the junior level, they should be pilots. Right now, locally, it's been an easy sell. There have been a lot of, aviation's exciting, there's no doubt. People that have retired have volunteered to help us. Even funding, there are grants out there. We received an American Airlines grant and right in the middle of COVID. It was amazing. But the long-term need, we're good in the classroom with all the manipulatives. Books and training information, career tech education helps fund that. I know in Texas, if you have a CTE program, you have 3 times the average daily funding per student. And that's 2 years out. So what we had in attendance in our aviation program 2 years ago is coming to us now, and it's growing. So every year we have more money that comes from the state of Texas, but that money only allows us, again, the manipulatives, the classroom educational curriculum part, not the physical part of job creation, flying, or even just working at airports. We need that. So that's what's lacking. I hope I helped answer some of your questions, but.
And Sid, Ralph, I don't know if you have the slide number available, but our particular recommendation for funding for programs is tiered. So teacher resources would fall under tier 1, which would be a program that's a smaller program that just need resources to do things like, and we'll hear from from other committees later, but trends and exposure to do some of the things to get resources into teachers' hands. That would be a tier 1 program, and funding for tier 1 would come from the proposed recommendations that we call for the 0.25%. So there is a tiered structure, and the resources that you're specifically talking about would fall under tier 1.
Okay, all right, thanks for both of your responses. And David, sound like Texas is on the ball there. I don't think every state is probably as given as Texas.
Well, and one last comment, I don't want to run out of time, but aligning it both with a career tech, and I think that's universal throughout the nation. Career tech education, the pendulum is swinging more to students that may not be going to college, but need a career tech alternative. And so I think there's additional funding that may end soon. But as we get deeper in the program, why I wanted to be on this committee is the excitement part of it at the local level from private donors, that will end, and we'll need the larger dollars to continue looking at job applications after their high school education.
So Ralph, if I could ask for the committee to, because this has come up a few times, take a look at Title IV funding and what kind of incremental opportunities there might be in terms of Title IV funding, in addition to this idea of loan forgiveness. But are there things that we can do in terms of loan limits, subsidized versus unsubsidized? Are there suggestions that we might make in the short term as well as the long term? And then the other piece, which we're planning on doing, but it's come up a few times, is the new program that the FAA has, the two $5 million grants. Once the FAA has an opportunity to work through, I've heard 400 applications. I know somebody said 300. I've heard 400 applications, which is incredible. Sort of what they've learned from the process and what they would hope going forward, because as we've talked about, they probably need more infrastructure help if this is going to be an ongoing assigned task to the agency. Is how to fund these things long term. What do they need? How are they going to disseminate all the good learnings they get from these projects? And that's going to take some infrastructure at the agency too. So what worked with this grant program, maybe what didn't work, and how we might make it more successful long term. I think that would be incredibly helpful once they have an opportunity to actually make some awards. I don't think they've done that yet, so that would be very helpful.
Okay, great.
Terrific, thank you. Okay, oh my gosh, wow, we're like running like clockwork today. All right, we get a 10-minute break, especially for those of us who have to run down the hallway to go to the restroom. So see you back at 10:25. Terrific. Welcome back, everybody. Great conversation this morning, and excited to hear from the Awareness Building Subcommittee, and handing it over to Joey.
Thanks, Sharon. I agree with you. It's been a great discussion so far. I really enjoy these meetings. All right, so we will wait just a second for the presentation to arrive. Awesome, thank you, FAA. Next slide, please. I just want to reintroduce everybody on our subcommittee. Everybody's been, really busy working hard, trying to, answer some of the questions that we've been tasked with. I don't have a charge slide, so let me just talk about that for a second. We are charged with looking at how aviation stakeholders can coordinate efforts to support youth in pursuing careers in aviation. And so we're looking, some of those questions are, what is the best structure to have these groups work together, and what are the best practices to reach young people? You'll hear from Stacy and Jennifer and Amy today about what we've been doing for that. We really are focused on how do we build awareness within youth. And then another one of the questions that we are considering and everybody talks about, and it's really exciting, and Yvette and even John Huff talks about, like, the overlap through, the different committees, but is the one-stop shop, and what umbrella groups are already out there doing that. And so I think all of us have identified different groups, and so as we continue our research and look to, towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, when we start making those recommendations, I think that'll be really exciting. John, I will say that I hadn't thought about, if we come up with a recommendation that this should be a new type of program or this one-stop shop, whatever that looks like, the funding mechanism on that. So I think that was a really solid point to make today. But anyhow, so Stacy and Jennifer and Amy are all on the call today. Whitney is unable to join us, but she has been working really hard, and it's a great team. And then I want to acknowledge Chris and Robin with the FAA. They have been great as well, and joining us and really providing us some good guidance when we have questions for them. So we are all very appreciative. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I will let Jen and Stacy take over.
Oh, thanks, Joey. So as Joey mentioned, we're very interested in what the current state of awareness is. And the first step in that process is to take all the great work that the Trends Committee has done, but also create a survey to fill in some of the gaps that we've identified. So what is that survey for? We would like to actually poll school counselors, and part of their job role is to evaluate and provide strategies to youth on how they might achieve their academic and career goals. And so they also play a very critical role in or a link between the school organization and also the parents. And so we're really interested to hear what they say, because I think they're very influential in youth career and academic development. So what do they currently know about aviation? What sort of resources do they currently direct or guide kids toward? Those are the types of questions that we're going to be asking. And of course, we would like to talk to all sorts of students, particularly in underrepresented areas. And we will certainly gain the consent of parents, counselors, and the organizations that were. And that will also be potentially a focus group. Once we come up with our recommendations, we'd really like to talk to the kids. Hey, does this make sense? We'll also work with professional organizations, and I think we're all members of several professional organizations, and they do a lot of great work already for outreach for youth. Maybe leverage some great things that they already do, and perhaps funnel that into the one-stop shop. So that's the basics of who the survey is created for. And now I'll pass it on to Stacy for the next 2 points.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, so as Yvette and Joey mentioned, there are some overlapping areas in our subcommittees, particularly with the surveys, but we are working together to ensure that we're complementing and expanding the survey work and not duplicating. I think it was Brett who talked earlier about gaining key information from youth who are involved in aviation programs and have interest in aviation, and we agree. You get really great data points from how they got started, what information was available to them, what was the hook, and we can obviously build recommendations based on what we know has proven to work before. But with our surveys, we hope to go to elementary, junior high, and high school students who are not already engaged in aviation or don't know yet that they will have an interest. To avoid going directly to the students, there's lots of hurdles there. We plan to work through organizations to help facilitate, and they can issue the survey on our behalf, hopefully. We've listed some organizations there on the slide. For example, the Boy and Girl Scouts. These youth are obviously already inclined to be involved in extracurricular activities or have the means to do so. It's just not aviation. So they provide one data point. But going further with groups like the Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCA, we may be able to access youth in more underserved communities. And for those groups, we know that the questions, have you ever been to an airport or have you ever been to an air show, are probably not the right questions to ask. We need to find out what their interests are. We need to learn who their role models are and where they connect with them. For example, if we learn that role models are family members or athletes, celebrities, social media influencers, teachers, and the connection point is either at home or the classroom or on social media, we can begin to develop recommendations for those groups to infuse aviation in the places they're already connected, taking aviation to them, meeting them where they are, if they are not able or aware to be able to engage in aviation in traditional pathways. We'd certainly love to have input from the rest of the task force on these survey questions. They're not as easy to craft, particularly for the younger age groups in elementary or junior high, and getting multiple choice versus written answers. So we'll be soliciting help where we can there. We also plan to, as Jen mentioned, survey counselors. This is another key data point in addition to the teacher survey that the Trends Committee is working on. We really want to hear from counselors. We know that not all counselors have opportunities to even talk with students about careers, particularly students who struggle in school or have socioeconomic issues that transcend into the classroom or other problem areas. There's not a lot of career counseling that's happening in key periods of high school. So we want to hear from the counselors and how best we could support them to do that. And we'll certainly ask for help on those survey questions as well. And I should note that we submitted a slide that wasn't the updated slide. So those first two bullet points should be the American School Counselors Association and the National Association for College Admission Counseling, not advising. And with that, I will turn it over to Amy.
Thank you so much. Can I grab the next slide, please? All right, so some of our next steps are going to be to distribute the survey through to some organizations. I think this is where, you know, our mutual connectivity to several professional organizations among all of the task subcommittees is going to be really beneficial so that we can determine who the best organizations are going to be to distribute the survey to. I think that the two counselors associations that were mentioned just previously are probably going to be one of our greatest assets in terms of reaching the most counselors. However, one of the challenges that we noted in one of our meetings is that it's currently the end of the school year. And so there could be some challenges with deploying the survey and having a broad enough sample size of replies based on counselor, other commitments that they have either outside of their school environment or, preparing for the next school year, given that most schools just let out or are in the process of letting out fairly quickly. So we'll need to determine the best deployment strategy as far as timing is concerned. Of course, gathering data and analyzing results. I think we also want to bring in some guest presenters at our subcommittee meetings that can help us understand kind of, the best ways to reach out to other groups, other important groups like counselors and other industry stakeholders within the education department. So those are some of the next steps that we've identified. And I echo all of the other subcommittees in saying that working together has been a really impactful experience. When we've had other subcommittee groups participate in our weekly or biweekly meetings, it's been incredibly informational and good to see that all of our heads are kind of in the same place and kind of thinking the same things, which will really help us create a strong recommendation. So for that, I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. Great presentation again. I'm so glad we're getting to spend this time together this morning. I have a couple questions on the survey, and I apologize. I can't remember if we had a presentation on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board or if it was one of our task force public meetings. But I thought we heard from Heather Penny and Dr. Becky Ludy about some insights they had on guidance counselors and just the effectiveness of a parent or teacher versus a guidance counselor and what the impact could be. So, and what I recall was they said guidance counselors, unfortunately, may be the least effective based on the amount of time they have to spend with a student. So is there an opportunity to consider some of that data that was presented earlier or narrow the lens? I think I'm sorry, I keep using that phrase. I think that you said elementary, middle school, and high school. And would it make more sense to just look at high school, for example, where the students are really trying to make career decisions versus trying to find out what an elementary school or middle school guidance counselor might be able to shape? And I know it's weird because we heard 10 and 18 are the two goalposts that are up there, and we're talking about some ages that fall in the middle there. But just curious how all that might come together, what the thought process was.
Yeah, I think for the student survey, it will be elementary, junior high, and high. But for the school counselor, it will only be the high school. Okay. And yes, we do run into the same issue of time with counselors and students, time ratio versus parents. We do plan to also, we didn't talk about it, but we do plan to survey parents. We're just not quite sure how that will develop. It could be that the students through the Boys and Girls Club or the Scouts, we may be able to get the parents also to do it simultaneously with those youth groups. But for the counselors, we just want to try to tease it out a little bit to see if we can get any additional information. The American School Counselor Association's annual conference is in July. We're working with that group to see if there's some kind of digital survey that we could offer to their attendees, 5 questions even, if we could just get a little bit of information A couple of years ago, I did a presentation at their conference called Careers Your Students Should Know About. And I didn't spend a lot of time on pilots. I touched on it, but I really spent a lot of time talking about all of the other aviation careers that are out there that students wouldn't necessarily know about. And what I found is the counselors absolutely didn't know about. But after the presentation, and I had a booth there, hundreds came up and said, I would love to be able to share information. I just don't know what to say. I don't have any idea about aviation. So can you point me to in a direction? There was a collegiate aviation guide published around the same time from the University Aviation Association that listed colleges, aviation universities and colleges. I'm not sure if it's an updated document today, but we did give that to counselors at the time to have on their resource shelves. So in my experience, I did find that there was interest, but it was low priority because it seemed so monumental for them to take on. But I think we can develop recommendations that and resources that wouldn't necessarily have to take up a lot of time or a lot of professional development for a counselor to be able to share basic information with students if they have the opportunity.
Okay, thanks. That's encouraging. And just one quick follow-up: when you're considering the survey design, I'm curious, I wonder if you are, who are we competing with? Who are the counselor, what fields are the counselors very familiar with, or what do they get the most frequent requests for? My 14-year-old is going to a CTE high school next year for automotive technology. They don't offer aviation. He's ripe for translating into aviation if he's interested. So I'm curious if those two things intersect, or other things for guidance counselors where they could help us identify where's our competition at.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. I like that point, Joe. And I do want to add on to what Stacy said, that I think that the data that Heather Penny and her group have come up with is really like the point. We know that they are a problem. So how, by surveying them, how can we, make them not a barrier to entry? And so that's really, I think, where our head is focused on.
Yeah, exactly, Joey. And I think we make assumptions about what counselors do and do not do. And I think part of our effort is to build on the Women in Aviation Task Force information and shine a light. And perhaps we might see where certain areas can be a benchmark, where others, perhaps we identify gaps. And so that's kind of the point of surveying the counselors in particular. But also, maybe our recommendation at the end of this is, here's our one-stop shop, counselors. And maybe it doesn't require a whole lot of additional communication, but at least we've provided them with some tools. So that if students do show an interest in aviation, now we can point them to that one-stop shop.
Okay. And Stacy, that's exactly what I wanted to share, is that I think this is bringing us back around that on the merry-go-round to the one-stop shop of resources. There were only two things that happened to me prior to me turning 18 years old that got me involved and on the pathway to a career in aviation. Only two things. One, a surprise Young Eagles flight because my mother made me get up on a Saturday morning to do something I didn't want to do. And two, 2 years later at 17, I went into my counselor's office and said, I'm going to be a pilot. Can you have anything for me? And you guys know, she pulled out the file drawer. She said, I think I saw a brochure with a plane on it. Let me see if I can find that for you. Exactly. And she handed it to me, and it was SIU. I got a 19 on the ACT, which I'm very proud of because my IQ is way higher. And the only thing that I did was apply to SIU. I applied to one college. I got in, and two things: a Young Eagles flight, and my college counselor saw a brochure with an airplane on it. I had nothing. And so it's the one-stop shop. I think we keep coming back to this idea of having this consolidated list.
is so important, because the counselors and teachers, people who are not in the trenches and do not come from corporate and do not know the industry, the only thing that they know has to be in the simplest form of finding information. I would love the idea to start aviation counseling, not counseling sessions, not aviation counselor sessions at conferences for us to be able to share resources, but at a minimum, having the simplest form of information that they can share to a student that walks into their office is something, Stacey, that you guys are right on top of in surveying them and asking them what they need, because those are the resources that are going to allow them to make those split moment decisions when those kids show up looking for resources and somebody who they're dependent on actually has to tell them they don't know. Let me get back to you. And they're saying that to 500 kids a year, probably.
So
David Purser, don't forget about the National Science Teachers Association on your survey. If you haven't looked at it, again, 40,000 science teachers, started in 1944. And Sid, you kind of got me thinking more in the teacher realm with your questions. So that might be a good place to go with the survey. I know that most of us that are on the AOPA curriculum foundation developing the high school aviation curriculum, most of us are science teachers, so it might be a good resource to include. They also have a very large conference as well.
Right.
You bet.
Yep. I just quickly, as you were talking, Stacey and Joey, about the survey questions, wondered if there might be an opportunity to tie in some of the college and career readiness databases. I know you want to keep it short, so maybe it's not, but just thought that since you've got the counselors, whether they use that, how, if there was something in that platform that pointed them to aviation or something like that, something along those lines. So just wanted to kind of offer that up.
Okay. And as a school counselor, I would like to say, don't forget about us in the younger years. In the state of Pennsylvania, there's a mandate that we're actually having to teach lessons on career counseling. So I'm not career counseling, on career awareness. So please don't forget about counselors in the earlier years. We can be very, very helpful in sharing aviation and aerospace information. It's also important, as you indicated, to take part in those counseling, the associations. That it is a great conference, and you have counselors from all over the country attending that conference there. But counselors can be a great support. They are open to sharing as well as helping students explore different careers.
Thank you, Sid. And just so you know, expect an invitation to come talk to our subcommittee soon.
Yeah, just another suggestion for the survey. That's a great quantitative measurement tool, but you might want to think about qualitative as well. So you're doing it a little bit in terms of having folks like Sid come and talk to your group. But maybe at the bottom of your survey, are you interested in talking to us? Could we reach out and ask you more? You might want to do a couple of small focus groups, with counselors, maybe middle school counselors, high school counselors, and see if you can't get them to give you the, to sort of round out the picture, right, of what you're going to learn from the survey. So just a suggestion.
Right. And we did have a few counselors on who responded to our initial survey. And one of the things that continued to come up was, again, just the knowledge base, so that when they are talking with students, that they have a better knowledge base. But again, counselors are very open to supporting.
Terrific.
Thank y'all.
Anybody else? Excellent. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, subcommittee. All right. Last but certainly not least, Brian and the Expanded Pathways, also known as the Boiling the Ocean Committee.
Oh man, thanks Sharon, and thank you so much for allowing us to share today on the great work that our committee is doing on expanding pathways to aviation. And obviously, as we all listen in just this morning, it's amazing the work that's going on and the dedication that it takes and the number of hours and meetings that everybody is doing to deal with the challenges faced within the aerospace industry for talent and making sure that we have the talent that we need. You know, coming from a large aerospace company that needs lots and lots of technicians, this is very near and dear to our company, AAR, and very happy with you know, being able to, you know, continue to work together with my team here on the Expanded Pathways Subcommittee. So next slide, please. So the team is really, you know, it's amazing, Sharon, how we got the team put together in all the right places, and you know, and I think ours in particular, between Joe, Nancy, James, Joel, and John, it's an incredible group of people that have worked in a lot of different areas of aviation over their careers and bring a tremendous amount to, I think, looking at, you know, how do we take the pathway or the pipeline? There's many different terms, but how do we ensure that it remains robust, that it doesn't die out after we get through our recommendations, and that it truly transforms the lives that we're talking about. We've all been in this aviation pipeline. We all somehow navigated in it. Some, like Tamara said, it was literally 2 events, and that's all it took. And I think that we're trying to capture that. There's great work across the country that's being done. And I think one of the things we talk about in our committee all the time is, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's use the best that every, you know, the best of what's out there, and make sure that what is out there is attainable to and able to be found out by the people who need, or the influencers that are out there. So next slide, please. So we have a slide on specifically our charge, and I'm not going to read it all, but obviously we're very, very focused in looking at ways to define the pipeline from K through 12 or K through 16, I say, and looking at the various steps along the way that we think are critical in order to capture the students and ultimately the employees that are needed in the industry. There's great programs out there. The apprenticeship program, we're looking into that, obviously, through the Department of Labor. Mentorship programs have proven to be, through prior research, very, very important in creating the almost the sticking mechanism, I say, to making it so that a student can literally move throughout their career and ultimately get to their first aviation job. And then when they're there in that aviation job, the importance that mentors play, in growing the career. So next slide, please. So our subcommittee, really started, and we're going to just give an update of where we're at in each of these groups. But we really started with kind of a case study approach, and we really highlighted this in our last meeting to really kind of start to narrow the focus in creating what are the 2 or 3 or 4 recommendations that are going to have lasting effect in creating and expanding, various aviation pathways beyond those that might be just traditional, whether it's a pilot pathway or a technician pathway. Several people in the committee today brought up, making sure that we stay more broad in our focus, because there are hundreds of jobs that are out there, probably thousands of jobs actually that are out there. So we then kind of, from that case studies, we kind of continued to narrow in and develop, several interviews with what we thought were key organizations that were doing it right. And I think that we're going to get an update in narrowing kind of the focus again to making sure that, we're looking at all agencies, all activities, that are out there. And I think one that I think we'll bring up in a couple of conversations later in these slides is the Smithsonian Institute conversation that Yvette and the Trends team brought up, as to the importance that teachers play in the effect on youth, and also the providing the career readiness, and ultimately their relationship between teachers and parents. I think has been I think a theme that has come up in several of the groups, and I think Smithsonian has created a very unique program. And I think though we didn't know about it in the previous meeting, it's very much in line with what we see as an important factor, in creating expanding pathways. I'd also talk a little bit here on Job Corps. We've had several meetings with senior leaders at Job Corps, looking at the fact that there are 120 plus campuses that Job Corps has around the country through the Department of Labor. It's very focused. If you look at how they're structured and what they do, and you start to kind of align what they do with the 180 A&P schools in the country, you start to look at pilot schools that are in the country, and you start to find that these centers are very geographically located where great aviation schools are located. And yet we found that other than a drone program in the great state of New York, is the only aviation program currently within Job Corps. And I think there's a really unique opportunity for this committee specifically to look at expanding pathways through an entity that is really large, $1.7 billion entity that does some really great work in creating educational programs for youth and young adults. So with that, I want to turn over to the next slide, and I will turn it now over to each of the committee chairs over the specific topic that we've kind of identified as being, I think, really important as we look at expanding pathways into and growing them and creating the foundation for what makes and constitutes what we think is going to be necessary to continue to educate and continue to grow the number of students that are choosing aviation pathways and ultimately careers in aviation. So I'd like to start with James Hall from Wichita State University Tech, and to talk a little bit about high school programs and expansion.
Great. Hey, thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate your leadership on this subcommittee. We've done a lot of really good work on this. I'm going to speak to you about this from a high school standpoint. We have quite a bit of knowledge that we've worked with different high schools to find a lot of these things out. And this is something that is across the board. And as we've all agreed in this committee, we need to start people earlier. So that means that we are tying in with our high school partners and helping them to be successful. So to help a high school be successful, there's a couple of things that they need. The very first thing they need is going to be an industry recognized credential. No matter what state they are in, state high school accrediting bodies always want their technical education programs to end up with some sort of credential that will help a student get a job. So while we may look at it in a longer term educational goals, they want something that the student can take with them when they graduate high school. It says, hey, I've completed this course. I'm ready to go get an entry-level job, go to work, or possibly continue my education as a part of that. And we have an issue currently that the FAA does not have any recognized credentials that a high school student can readily attain that would then apply towards a national credential. Let me give you some examples of some curriculum that we have talked about and that we have seen in place in various places. So certain schools may offer a program, and I'm going to say they do a sheet metal program that would fall into a Part 147 program. Unfortunately, the student's time in that one, there's no credential that allows that student to transfer that and count towards their Part 147. So one of the things that we've really talked about is a national credential through the FAA for certain aspects that could be taught in high schools that then would transfer into adult programs, and they would get credit for them, such as the AMT program or the pilot program, depending on the state. So there's a lot of good curriculum out there, which brings us to our second point. What we are really asking for is the FAA to approve a national curriculum. One of the things about this task force, we've always talked about, we don't want to reinvent the wheel because we know that there's a ton of good stuff out there and a lot of good work has been done. So if you look at like the AOPA curriculum that they have for a flight program, they offer that to any school that wants it, but it's not recognized by the FAA as a certified curriculum as on a national level. We would like to see a nationally approved curriculum as for different programs that could lead to transferability and job skills. One thing from the high school perspective that is very challenging is the cost barrier. As you are all aware, aviation programs can be extremely cost prohibitive and expensive. And while I don't have a good answer for this, I do know that it's something that we've come across time and time again, where the high schools are a lot more willing to host these programs and run these programs if it's not a huge financial burden. One thing that it's people that aren't in secondary education may not understand is that schools have to choose which CTE programs they offer. They have a limited resources and they have limited instructors with limited abilities, and they need to be certified in those areas. So they have to make a choice. And quite honestly, it's a lot easier to find a high school teacher that can teach construction than it is that can teach aviation. So we have to make those resources available to them and do what we can to remove the cost from the high school to make these careers more appealing to them. Which goes into the final point, is that what is the benefit for the schools to do it? Because if I can choose at a high school to run a construction program that's inexpensive or a photography program that's inexpensive, what can we offer to the high schools to incentivize them to go into aviation programs? In some areas in the country, we have high schools that can see that there are very good jobs and that they are working in partnership with different organizations to make that happen. But in other areas in the country, that's very much lacking. And there's an educational piece that goes with that to helping the school districts understand what the outcomes of are these aviation careers and how that we can help them put those into place. So it really is, I heard somebody say earlier, it's drinking the ocean. It really is. We've got a lot of different things here that go into this and that we need to look at to help remove barriers. And I think that's a lot of it when it comes to the pathway expansion, is if we can remove the barriers for our partner institutions, then we will be successful. And if we can't do something to move the needle or remove those barriers, we won't be. I think it's as simple as that. Ryan, I know you want to add on here.
No, we'll let that go for questioning, but I think, James, you did a great job, and I think clearly I think there's great examples. I love the AOPA curriculum and what they're doing on the pilot side. Clearly, the pilots have the credential of you can get the private pilot certificate while you're in high school. That's not as easily done, at least on the maintenance side. The FAA is clearly working on that, which we're glad to hear. But I think if we talk about, and I hear this term a lot, about stackable credentials. Yep. And I think there's an opportunity here, James, within your area specifically to our group of looking at almost unbundling the A&P in some ways and creating, a more stackable credentialed kind of regular or recognized credential from
right.
FAA perspective.
Yeah, you and I have talked about that a lot, and I didn't want to get too deep into it, but because we have a limited amount of time to talk about this. But there are at least 10 pieces of the 147 that could be broken out, taught at the high school level. The students could receive credit for them and put them that much further along in their career and ready to move forward. And honestly, you could do the entire general curriculum at the high school level and be that much closer to going to work right out of high school.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So the next one we thought, and we've heard this theme several times, and I thought, Jennifer, you brought it up really well in the awareness group of the link between parents and teachers. And I think John and I have had several conversations, it's very specific to this. We had a great opportunity to sit in on the Trends Committee with the Smithsonian Institute and what they're doing with teachers during the summer. And it very much, though we didn't know about it at the time, very much aligned with the idea of really focusing on teachers. So I'd like to have John, if you would be kind of willing to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing as it applies to the importance of teachers in expanding pathways as well as parents.
Yeah, Ryan. Hey, thanks. The theme I think you're hearing today is the importance of the teachers and the parents, and I think that is kind of the major theme that we need to focus on. And one of the ideas that Ryan came up with is this camp for like a summer camp for teachers, and I totally agree with this. I think we take the teachers and it'd be beautiful if we could take them all to Oshkosh. That might be difficult, but there's other ways to do this. And let me talk about that in a second. But if we inspire these teachers and we educate the teachers around aviation, they go back to their schools and they educate their students and they can educate the parents. One of the things that, you've been hearing also is there are multiple roles in an airline, for example. It's not just the pilot. It's not just the mechanic. It's not just, flight attendants. Every job you can imagine is in an airline. And I think that educating the parents of this is so important so that the parents understand a path and where they can actually end up and how many different roles there are. One of the things that we keep talking about, that Ryan and I keep talking about, is the cost is obviously an issue to bring these teachers into a camp type setting. But the airlines have a big stake in this right now. A lot of us retired during COVID, and now all of a sudden they're back to almost to the 2019 passengers and demand. Well, guess what? Now they're short of pilots again. They're starting to talk about ab initio programs and things like that. I think we go to the airlines and we ask them for help. Travel, airlines buy hotel rooms in bulk, and think of different ways to try to reduce the cost by utilizing the industry. The other thing that I think is really important, and it kind of goes back to this concept of Oshkosh. It'd be great to take every teacher to Oshkosh, but Ryan kind of said it. There's institutions all around the country that are would be super valuable. For example, the Museum of Flight, which is just about a mile from where I'm sitting right now. The Museum of Flight would love to help us with a program, a camp type setting for teachers. They have experts, they have they have systems matter experts, they have people that have been in the industry, they have classrooms, they have facilities. I think of the Strategic Air Command Aerospace Museum in Omaha, not far from where Ryan lives these days. And I think that rather than reinvent the wheel, reach out to these institutions and try to get them to help us and support us. And I know they would. Like I say, the Museum of Flight here in Seattle is fantastic. I've done a number of events at that facility. I think that's what we need to do, though. I think that a camp to bring these teachers in, to inspire them and educate them, to educate the kids. You've heard this as a theme. A lot of the teachers and the counselors don't understand the industry. but let's teach them about the industry and let's do it in bulk. So throw it back to you, Ryan.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. And I'd like to then talk and turn it over to Joe and Nancy to talk about really another kind of theme that we're hearing across the subcommittees is the need for information and for it to be a more readily available to the influencers that are out there. So maybe Joe, I'll start with you, and then Nancy, feel free to, I know you will, to hop on to during the conversation.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody. When I was looking at the slide, I was actually envisioning a plus sign between our three columns. And then I feel like you've got an entire equation here. What happens in the high school on property when the students are not at home? What happens in the home? The critical role of the parents. And then what happens on that little device that we carry around in our hands all the time? There's a way to continue to personalize it and make it accessible. And we're only as good as our data and our information and how current it is, how helpful it can be, and also how accessible it can be. And that's not just having the information in one centralized place, but also awareness that the information exists in one centralized place. Now that awareness extends to underrepresented groups who may not know that there could be a powerhouse resource for them. And so when you add all of those things together, I think we really truly can build a picture that addresses all of the things that our subcommittee was supposed to do. A lot of it is input output. So the information that we're outputting to the public, it's that lack of centralized information. It's the one-stop shop. I think that must be the phrase that best embodies this task force. How can we create the one-stop shop? And what does that do for all of these groups, whether you're a student, a teacher, a parent, a guidance counselor, an interested neighbor who wants to help? You can all have access to the same information. And then also, what does that do for us to really understand how full the pipeline is getting, or what we need to do to redouble our efforts to keep the people in the pipeline? I sort of think about it as a number of people entering, thinking this is for them, and then we've seen the data. Again, I think I'll reference the Women in Aviation Advisory Board presentation that talked about the tremendous amount of female student pilots we have. And then as they progress on through their ratings, they drop off in dramatic numbers. So it's not about getting people into the pipeline, it's about keeping them there. And so if we were able to have a one-stop shop, especially for the students, in a way that would allow them to opt in to sharing some of their data, then we have that national tracking mechanism that we've talked about. And the formal way for that to start for many of us, another one of my children, was the issuance of the student pilot certificate that just came in the mail last week. So he is now known to the FAA. Is there something else? Is the student pilot certificate certainly works for pilots, but what about all these other careers? And once you've got that card to carry around in your wallet, it opts you in and allows us to track the students and figure out how we can tailor information to their needs and not lose them to that competition that may exist that we talked about earlier. And that also brings us to the translation between a career they may be interested in that they don't know can be connected to aviation. My favorite one right now is automotive to aviation, but there's so many of them. You could be interested in the culinary arts and not know that that ties into aviation. You can be interested in interior design and not know that that comes into designing a cabin, but also the science and the physics involved, the type of materials you're using, the weight of the materials, et cetera. There has to be a way to show an aviation connection, even where an aviation spark doesn't yet exist. And I think the final point I wanted to make was just what I said at the beginning, the underrepresented groups. We can build all of this. If we don't, and I'm so excited about the FAA social media presentation after lunch, if we don't understand how to reach the students and the ways that they experience receiving information or looking for information, then we've built something great, but it's just gonna park somewhere where it's not frequently accessed. So thanks, Ryan.
Nancy.
You know what, Ryan? So Joe did a great job covering all those items, and I'm gonna kind of back clean up when we have our next slide with the next steps. So she did a great job.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So from a committee perspective, these are kind of our 4 focus areas as we really start to hone in, though these aren't the final recommendations by any means, but they're areas by which I think we feel as a committee are very important. And I think, Jim, I'll take the first one for you. I think you did a good job kind of explaining this nationalized credentialing and providing easier access for CTE programs to put in a sheet metal program or a composite program or an avionics kind of credential that's maybe more updated than the FCC license, for example. I think there's a lot of work that we're doing to kind of flush that out and what that might look like to provide, greater access points and not as expensive programs to try to create from scratch, like a full-blown A&P might be, or a full-blown pilot program or whatever. John did a great job, obviously explaining the summer camp idea. And I think one of the things that John and I talked about is it doesn't just have to be in the summer. So if we look at, call it 10 or 12 museums across the country that are geographically located within an hour of a lot of teachers and a lot of people who could be influenced in these workshops, I think could be a mechanism by which we can create the curriculum that goes with it and really have the power and influence that we think is necessary. I'll put a plug in here for Horizon. When John was there, I think about what Horizon did with giving teachers a scholarship to become private pilots, and we think about the impact that one private pilot who happens to be a teacher, who happens to every single year influence 50 to 100 students. It doesn't take very long and that many teachers to start influencing tens of thousands of people, of students into the career of aviation. So I think there's a lot of work yet to be done in this area, but definitely one that I think as we look at having an impact could have, just tremendous impact. And last but not least, and I'll turn this over to Nancy, and let her finish this out, and then questions at the end. So Nancy.
Great, thanks, Ryan. One of the things I love about going last as we're making our presentation is that I can refer to what everybody else presented and say what they said. And the last couple pieces I think that we want to just note here is just that a reaffirmation of this concept of a robust national aviation website, that one-stop shop that Joe talked about. And I think as we look ahead to our work and what we want to do to add to this is, of course, talk with everybody and all the other subcommittees and really pool those ideas so we can really make good use of that word robust. I think also we want to explore other ways to inform what that might look like. So there's opportunities for surveys with other groups, colleges and universities, flight training centers, AMT training, other areas, so that we can make sure that we haven't missed anything as we start to look at this. And also look at the opportunities for hosting. What is the best way to host this? Who is best to do it? How does that come to fruition, and where does it live? And then the last piece is, again, just reiterating our support for this concept of a virtual council or platform. I'm sure all of you have been that person where you get a call from someone who says, hey, you know, my wife's best friend's nephew wants to be a pilot. Can you talk to him? Or one that I had the other day, oh, somebody at my golf club, she works in the pro shop and she wants to be a pilot. Would you be willing to talk with her? And as I hear of these connections and you know, talk to these young people who are interested here, it just becomes more and more clear to me that they don't have the resources, and how great it is that they were able to talk to their, you know, mothers, best friends, whoever, to connect them with somebody who can help them. But to be able to really explore this and present this information in a two-way platform. And I think the national website is a great idea, but that really is a one-way presentation of information. But to be able to have somebody there, a live conversation, who's not only able to go back and forth and tailor the conversation to your needs, but can then follow up as well, and then can present you know, the specific pathway for that student of, okay, so you're interested in being a maintenance technician. Let's talk about what now you need to do to get there specifically. And that, of course, ties back into this pathways concept again. So we're really excited to really delve into these ideas, work within our committee, work with the other groups, and see if we can come up with something that's meaningful and useful across the board. And that's all I have, Ryan.
Awesome. And I think that next slide is, I think, to the end, and would be open to any questions that the committee and the people that are listening today might have.
Go ahead, Ralph.
I think you guys did a great job. Thank you. I have a couple of, I guess they're questions or maybe points that I'd like to raise and see what you think. The idea of a credential, I think, is interesting. I look at it from the engineering point of view. I know some of you are focused more on maintenance and pilots, but if you look at the engineering dimension of this, most of the industry requires 7 to 10 years of real world experience to get an entry-level job. And so if you're 21 when you graduate from college from an engineering program, how do you get that experience? Where does that come from? You have to have, you know, there's no way to currently measure the experience gained during the high school years as a real world experience that can track into a credential to get somebody a job. And so if there's a way for you to be able to link that to the kind of jobs that require that kind of expectation with your credentialing, I think there would be some asset in that. The other dimension that I think, you know, I think it was, let's see, I think it was James who mentioned the idea that the national curriculum would be approved by the FAA. I would recommend that you talk to them and vet the idea with them about them approving a national curriculum, because I think that's a question that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think I can, you know, on the FAA front, you know, obviously the FAA is going through a significant upgrade in the regulatory environment on the pilot side of things, or on the maintenance side of things, excuse me. And I think that, you know, I think where we're going with this credentialing aspect is that it's recognized, right? The FAA recognizes a curriculum if it meets these you know, academic standards, you know, similar to, like, I guess there are other organizations like NC3, for example, or there's CertTech that has, or ASTM for that matter, has credentialing that if you create the curriculum, I just think that there's value on the FAA side to look at it a little bit closer as well. Though we're talking technical now, I definitely appreciate that, Ralph, and we'll look at, and have been, I should say, we are in conversations with the FAA right now on another project on the Choose Aerospace curriculum, which is an FAA general-based curriculum that the FAA is heavily engaged on and working to create some sort of recognition. I can't really tell you what we're finalizing, but because we don't know what it exactly will look like yet. But I definitely It's very clear that the FAA is engaged, and we do appreciate the work that they are doing to get the updated 147 out, as well as looking at ways to get aviation maintenance education adopted into high schools across the country. So thank you, Ralph.
Brett.
Yeah, so I just I kind of heard an underlying point, and I want to be able to reinforce it and hear any discussion from the subcommittee is, we focus a lot, and I think Nancy brought up, creating two-way streets or opportunities for engagement. I think we focus a lot on getting information out into the potential talent pool. And what I always hear in that, and I want to make sure it's more than implicit, is we're also creating avenues for employers to share information, engage with potential candidates, take advantage of stackable credentials or other resources made available through the FAA or other agencies in order to help sustain their pipeline. So I really do see implicit in everything we talk about, or everything I'm hearing, particularly from this subcommittee, that two-way street of creating opportunities for employers or other stakeholders in the industry to kind of make good on the resources we create for the sake of potential employees or future aviation professionals. I also just want to underscore the point, because one of the challenges we have as an industry is we are so broad and diverse, and we've been good about reminding each other of that when it comes to types of employment: pilots, technicians, cabin crew, website designers, ticket agents, whatever it is. We also need to remember that in terms of the types of businesses or business lines there are. So it's easy for airlines to kind of drive our thinking in a certain extent, and certainly is the most popular imagery, I think, in the general public. But our members, repair stations, are working in a variety of different business lines that touch aviation, including airlines and air carriers and operators, but also FBOs and general aviation, other aerospace fields serving governments, from sheriff's offices to firefighting units or using aviation tools. And now with the emergence of new technologies, and particularly UASs, there's a lot of opportunity in different fields, even beyond what we all might first think of in terms of aviation specialties. And I think it's good to have those reminders in place that, we think broadly, not just about the jobs we do, but also for what entities or what lines of business we do them.
And I'm glad you talked about employers. And I think that has to be part of the two-way street. I think there's a number of job fairs maybe they used to go to. They had to figure out how to adapt just in the last year and a half, at a time when suddenly they weren't hiring. So it'll be interesting to see, now that we never left it, but we're certainly back in it, what have employers developed that don't rely on in-person? You're having to be in person at a job fair. How have things moved more virtually that may connect well to what we're talking about, something that's a national site? Internships and mentorship pairings are really important, but so too are apprenticeships, entry-level jobs, and connecting future employers with potential candidates. And not having to go to a number of different websites to search for this information, or employer by employer, where again, you may not realize there's some excellent jobs that you're not even aware of, but having this one-stop shop could be important. And we don't even know enough about the emerging technology jobs that are going to exist to describe specifically what those skill sets are going to be, how they connect to curriculums that have yet to be developed. So it also allows us to have a foundation in place, as the tire needs to be changed on the car while it's moving down the highway. I mean, that's sort of what these new emerging technologies jobs are going to look like. And we're behind because we don't know how to define it, but at least we're going to have a foundation, hopefully, that allows us to build from. So I do hope, I guess we don't spend a lot of time talking about employers here, but I'm glad you wanted to make sure we say it implicitly, because I agree, and we'll have to start highlighting that more.
So we've moved into the open discussion phase, and I think this could be a good segue. Thank you, Ryan, and your team. Anybody have any other questions specifically for expanded pathways? So just to follow on to what Joe and Brett talked about in terms of employers, I'm wondering if we should also be thinking about alignment with other industries in a good way, right? That are also can be allies for us because our students can also help them, right? So I'm specifically thinking, and Ryan, this idea of breaking down the 147 also pushed me here too, right? Composites, welding, sheet metal, right? They're not just for aviation, right? And then you don't have to compete for CTE resources. You just use CTE resources just like everybody else, right? You could go to automotive, you could go to, and that's true for engineering too, right? We have students who come to us for engineering who are drawn to aviation who end up in automotive because they've got the skill set. I know we're not trying to feed other industries, but I'm wondering if we can use other industries as allies. That's what I'm saying, right? Who can say, yeah, this is really important. This should be funded. This should be this whole idea of, especially on the technical side, this technical aptitude skill set that so many of our industries need. And this whole idea, just to tie it in, of bringing back the supply chain to the US, which has also been, made very apparent by the pandemic that we had offshored a lot of those things. And bringing that back means that we're going to need a technical workforce that can do those things. Which gets me to my last point, which we haven't spent much time talking about, is that a struggle we have, and I'm sure others share this, is that for technical fields, we have really lost a lot of the mechanical aptitude. It is a major barrier to entry. Students do not play with their cars. They do not do erector sets anymore. It's a real issue, this whole technical aspect. We'll get students in an A&P program who have never touched a wrench, and we have to start there. And so this whole idea of strengthening CTE education and us being one beneficiary of that, I don't know, maybe that has legs in terms of creating allies and places where we can get extra support for our recommendations. I just throw that out to the group.
Sharon, you make such excellent points. And just to reiterate, with the funding committee's proposal, that's all about connecting employers with funding sources to get that funding directly to their future employees. We have spent a lot of time researching and identifying ways that employers are looking to onboard and recruit and train new employees. And the average cost to recruit and train a new employee in the aviation industry is $10,000 per. And so when we're actually circumventing that process on the front end, it's a cost savings mechanism to start training people at 10 years old. Mm-hmm. It really is a huge benefit. And maybe one of the things we need to do as a funding committee is show the cost benefit analysis of pipelining young people into aviation careers long term, because it reduces attrition. It absolutely builds rapport with brand credibility, especially when it comes to local employers in the community, like here in Chicago with Boeing and United. Having these corporations, these major corporations, especially on the East Coast and in Seattle and South Carolina, these corporations are already entrenched in a lot of philanthropic activities in the community. And how much more important would it be for them to partner with institutions in programming that's directly in line with their workforce needs in that community? Mm-hmm. This is exactly what our proposal and funding is calling for those employers to build and grow organically their future employees and building that relationship in that talent pipeline. The other thing you touched on, Sharon, that's so important is we said it 1,000 times on these calls, we not only should we not reinvent the wheel, we will not reinvent the wheel. There are CTE programs all over America that are putting out highly qualified talent. We have tested this hypothesis in Chicago. There are CTE programs for welding, CTE programs for sheet metal, CTE programs for automotive, CTE programs for construction, CTE programs for plumbing, utility. All of these CTE programs go directly into jobs at O'Hare International Airport. Every last one of them. For HVAC, for facilities management, the painters at O'Hare make 6 figures. The electricians at O'Hare make 6 figures. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We will not reinvent the wheel. We can borrow from other CTE programs until we get this credentialing figured out. We have worked for years in Chicago. We've been doing the work at Aerostar to provide aviation education and training for the last 12 years. Every time we want to set up a program, they ask us, what certification does this lead to? And we're like, aviation jobs. That's the certification. Like, I don't know, we don't know how to explain it. And so one of the things, Ryan, I want to work with your team and maybe talk with your team about some of the other standardized mechanisms for industry recognition that are already in place in the US. They exist exemplary in other facets, like the Gold Star, the Guide Star rating for nonprofits. You know, everybody that has a nonprofit knows that you want to get your star to platinum because that increases your ability to get more grants. And so that's not necessarily a federal guidance. It's a best practice that's backed up by by prudence of the nonprofit to be able to position themselves to prove that they're worthy of being able to get funding dollars. And so maybe the first step is not to just go straight for curriculum and creating curriculum that can be used universally. Maybe we can look at the Trends Committee and look at the Pathways Committee and come up with a list of best practices that would actually certify or, you know, sanction or, you know, bless the work of that organization if they meet all of these particular criteria at a level where they can receive a rating of accountability and, based on their outcomes, credibility in the industry to be recognized nationally.
Tamara, you're suggesting, I think, because I think I've heard you say this, almost like our site could become the Yelp with reviews of who's got a really good program. Is it right? Yeah.
And we talked about originally it being self-generating, right? So this particular conglomerate of resources is now, people are signing on to it. They're subscribing to the ideology that I need to be a part of this group. I need to be blessed and sanctioned by this particular, by the FAA as a recognizable, high quality aviation and aerospace education program. We have been really blessed to be reached out to by organizations from the Pentagon to the Smithsonian to other organizations. And what they've done is that they've done their research on organizations that do the work that they're looking to be done. And then Aerostar pops up, OBAP pops up, EAA pops up, AOPA pops up, because they did their due diligence. So to create something like that where it's self-populating, people sign on, they create they create a profile, and the FAA, you know, requires them to commit to submitting all of the documentation and validation for them to receive a rating, which lines up directly with what we proposed as our tiered system for funding recommendations. I just have to go back to the fact that this is a big part of what we did in our homework on the funding committee, is making sure that the money that 0.25% of billions of dollars of DOD and DOT contracts could actually fund programs that have already been pre-certified by the Federal Aviation Administration.
Other thoughts in this open?
Sharon,
thanks.
Let me put my hand down first. Sorry, the iPad. I haven't talked a lot about business aviation in the public meetings, but I want to make sure we talk about the national focus and then also how much of this is just local. So we employ we create over 1 million jobs in the United States. An NBA member, we have over 11,000 members all around the United States. So a lot of the companies we've been talking about are large employers or connected to large cities. But in the end, everything is local. And something interesting I think we've all seen during the pandemic is a lot of national organizations, once offices closed, especially with our young workers, we found that they wanted to go back where they were from. And they were able to reconnect with family or with their communities while they were still working national jobs. And so it's just a very interesting shift in mindset that you go to where the job is, and it may take you away from home or away from the community you grew up in. And we may now be dealing with this idea that I don't have to live in a city far away from my family, but perhaps there's an employer for me right in my backyard. And so as we're talking about these national efforts, I'm also hoping that we can think about from a regional perspective, from a geographical perspective, how could someone find out where they were born and raised, where they were educated, where they're able to participate in a CTE that's within a 50 or 100-mile radius of their home is also the same place where they're able to find employment and find jobs. And so when they think about their work-life balance, they think about the culture that they're looking for in an employer. When they're thinking of the compensation and benefits, they're able to look at that holistically and not just making an employment decision based on one of those three factors. And so I love the national conversations because that's what we're supposed to be doing, but also what do we need to do right in people's backyards to help those employers that are going to say, we support aviation and we are very far from the closest major city, but we have a CTE program, and how could we keep our own community growing up in our community and continuing to grow?
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Joe. Great point. I think Brian had his hand up next.
Well, Joe, you absolutely read my mind. We're spending too much time together, clearly. But I'm actually I moved out of Texas, and I'm actually one of those people. I live in a town of 900 in central Nebraska now, and but still keeping my job at AAR. But I think one of the things I think was interesting is that about 2 years ago, Grand Island, which is just down the road from me, they wanted to get into aviation, but they didn't know how. And so they flew out to McKinney. I took them to an aviation high school. And if you go to their school today, it's got Redbird simulators. It's got an airplane that's being built, and it's an absolutely amazing program. And it took me 1 year to get a high school who knew nothing about aviation to actually have a robust program, in which they're now looking at using the Choose Aerospace curriculum this fall so that they have a maintenance component. They have the AOPA curriculum, and now they're going to use the Choose Aerospace curriculum. And I love, Joe, that idea that COVID has really changed a lot of things and a lot of thinking. And I go back to Sharon, your original question. I do think that there's value in working together with organizations to on the national level. And a good example is the STEM Education Coalition is working really close with us on a lot of administrative initiatives in the Build Back Better campaign of the Biden administration, and the fact that we could leverage the fact that we all need talent, and I think we're pooling together and we're showing a broader group of people these career paths that in fact they're intermingled with one another in all actuality. And I think that as we look at legislation and this idea of bringing supply chain back means more people. Same thing with aviation. Are the airlines going to continue to outsource maintenance? Are they going to continue to do things that they did pre-pandemic? They may not. I have no idea. But I think if we can create the talent and the systems here with enough of workforce, I think there's some good discussions to be had, around Sharon, collaborating with, kind of entities where that cross function, where both organizations or both entities can benefit. So that's just my thought.
Terrific. Thank you, Ryan. Ralph?
Hi, yeah, I've been really fascinated by the conversation. I think that there are really exciting ideas that are coming forth from all of the subcommittees. And I think that there's a lot of overlap and linkage that I think we can take advantage of. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about what I've been hearing today. I think that we need to start thinking about, we've been all talking about a lot of the what we are thinking about and what we want to do and what we think should be done. I think we need to take the conversation to the next level and start thinking about how. I think that it's important for us to think about how we could operationalize some of these ideas and see, because the devil's always in the details. How do you make something work? It's a wonderful idea, but what's going to make it work, and how can it be operationalized? And I think that's the next level of conversation that we have to start focusing on.
Thank you, Ralph. Yvette?
That was actually a great segue, Ralph, as I was just going to raise I think we talked about this at the last public meeting, but I'm not sure. It could have been at a subcommittee level. The legislative proposal for the National Center for the Advancement of Aviation, which was introduced in the last Congress, which has the vision for a federally chartered nonprofit entity that would foster this kind of collaboration, and whether it serves as sort of a touch point for some of the pathways, I think especially that Ryan's subcommittee is working on. So just wanted to throw that out for folks to remember. I don't know if it's been introduced in this Congress yet, but I know it probably will.
I think it has.
It
has. Yeah, and
Yep.
I've asked for some help from the FAA Government Affairs Office to get some sense of where it's at and what it would look like. Because to Ralph's point about operationalizing, that could be a home for a lot of the things that we're suggesting. Yeah. So I hope to get some more information about that. I think they're a little distracted right now with an infrastructure bill, but that although somebody might try to make the case they should put this in the infrastructure bill. I don't know. So yeah, Joey, go ahead.
Just a thought on other industries and workforce development. Does anybody participate with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? I don't, but I get their emails because it's workforce development. And I think last week they just had a big presentation on like workforce development into industries. And I signed up for it, but I couldn't make it. But it might be worth it, one of us looking into that or reaching out to them and seeing what they're doing, because of all the challenges that we have, and we've talked about that other industries probably have, and how we can like work together. That might be a pretty interesting conversation to have. I don't know, Sharon, do you work with them or talk to anybody?
No, I figured Yvette, and I saw her nod her head. I bet you she's got a connection to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. If not, I can get there. It's all related.
And I don't know, I really wanted to make that event last week, but I just couldn't be there. And if they even talked about aviation or aerospace,
Yeah. Ryan, did you add something?
Yeah, Joey, I do have a contact, and they did have an aviation kind of summit in March of this year. So yes, we are connected. I have had some pretty good conversations with their workforce development. And so, yeah, but it's a good reminder as it applies specifically. I was more from an AAR perspective, but from this task force perspective, we need to make sure that I'll re-engage with her and provide an update to you and the team.
Yeah, and really just like, what are the other industries doing too? Like, because like you mentioned, Sharon, I do think that could be a pretty easy mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Brett's raised this point too about, others are dealing with this. How have they figured it out, right? So we could get some good best practices from them as well, which would be terrific. Wow, we are like, the trains are running on time today, man. This is awesome. All right, so you got another 10-minute break. We'll see you back at noon for Allison LePage to talk to us about the FAA's social media strategy and how they're reaching young people. I know several of us are very excited to hear from Allison, and see you back in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. All right, well, really excited to welcome Allison LePage back to our group, who we met in our very first public meeting, and to hear more about the FAA's social media strategy. Allison, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Just a little bit of background about myself. This is the fourth agency, government agency that I've worked for, and the third agency that I've worked for on social media. The government started in social media back in 2009, and we have grown quite a bit since then. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background on what we're doing with influencers and social media across the board. I'm really grateful to the FAA. This is the first agency that I've ever worked for that really prioritizes the involvement and relationship building with the public and influencers outside of the FAA walls. And I really am just very grateful to the agency for giving us that support. So just a little bit of background, the FAA has nearly 1.5 million followers across 6 different platforms. That includes Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Medium. We also have 2 accounts on Twitter and Facebook, which we support for the FAA Administrator, Steve Dixon. These are pretty new, but if you are not following him, please go and do that. His handle is at FAA_Steve. And on LinkedIn, it's just Steve Dixon. Over the past 12 months, our audience has increased by nearly 200,000 followers. We have published nearly 8,300 posts on social media, which is an average of 172 posts a week. So to say that our team is busy is probably an understatement. Last spring, we launched our new FAA blog, Cleared for Takeoff, and our FAA podcast that air up there. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to our podcast, you can find it on iTunes. Since last May, we have published over 150 blog posts on the FAA blog, which has a dedicated page for STEM outreach. STEM is something that the team and the Office of Communications and throughout the FAA is constantly talking about. We really have prioritized it since the 4 years that I've been with the FAA, and I'm really happy to see that because I think that encouraging youth and the next generation of the aviation workforce is really one of our largest priorities. After 19 episodes and over 18,000 listens on our podcast, it's also entering our 3rd season starting this summer. We have a number of different folks that we've interviewed. We have an Inspire series where we have actually the FAA administrator interview young people in the aviation community and the workforce, or people that are aspiring to be in the aviation workforce. So let's go to the next slide. So influencing influencers. By collaborating with influencers, we gain a unique ability to extend our outreach beyond our immediate followers to other aviation enthusiasts who can share with their audience and other aviation enthusiasts. By influencers, what we're talking about are people that are either aviation geeks, aviation specialists, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and other acquired followers that sometimes equal into the millions. What it really is in for them is that we have an opportunity to partner with them so that they have content, either if it's safety related, if it's inspiring young people in the STEM area, to be able to message in terms of on their platforms what's happening, and to hopefully inspire them to follow or to choose a route for their own profession. If they're still in college, if they're still in high school, how do we inspire them to hopefully find different interests that they can pursue in their professional career? Besides that, we offer them different opportunities to write guest blogs. We also interview them for the podcasts. We have them focused on live events that we produce for the public, and we also do Instagram takeovers. And what that is really a collaboration in terms of the relationships that we build with these folks. One of the examples that I always like to talk about is a gentleman by the name of Vic Moss. And he is really big in the UAS community. He's very well respected. He's a Part 107 pilot. And sometimes the information that the FAA pushes out on our own social media platforms doesn't always resonate with the audience. But when we bring people like Vic Moss in, he helps to get the information out to the UAS community so that they can understand it from a Part 107 pilot's perspective. And that's really crucial. Next slide, please. One of my favorite influencers that is new to kind of our team is Stevie Tressenberg. And she is someone that I actually found on TikTok. The FAA doesn't currently have a TikTok account, as in many government agencies do not. But I literally was sitting in a Lowe's parking lot and I was scrolling through TikTok. And if you're not on TikTok, I highly suggest that you get on it. They have great cooking recipes. And I found her, and she is a general aviation pilot out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. She went to the University of Michigan. And, we started chatting, and I asked her, at first she was a little concerned why the FAA was reaching out to her. She thought she had done something wrong, and I reassured her that she had not. But really just started building a relationship with her so that she could hopefully get some safety information out to our general aviation pilot community. And after talking with her, I learned that she actually decided to go to flight school and get her license based off of an Instagram post. She had seen a post pop up on one of her friend's accounts, and it was her brother who had been flying, her friend's brother, and she started kind of becoming more and more interested. And now she has over 1.2 million followers on TikTok and about 40,000 on Instagram. And that is really a true testament to the content that she produces. She does safety checks before she flies out. She does a lot of different videos in terms of talking to air traffic controllers. She also prioritizes a lot of the ground maintenance and runway safety, and that really actually helps show a lot of young people the entire breadth of the aviation culture within general aviation. We're really proud to have this relationship with her. She recently was interviewed by the FAA administrator for our Straight from Steve series, which is a weekly series that we produce for all FAA employees. And then we also had the FAA administrator also interview her for our podcast episode. And, we were able to clip down some different interview bites. We call them snackable bites. And we were able to share those on our social media channel. And we're just really happy and fortunate to have that relationship with Stevie. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of Stevie, both for our Air Up There podcast episode, as well as kind of those bites that I had talked about before. And we're able to measure each of those segments that we push out on social media, because everything we do is based on data. So we know as the digital team in communications here at the FAA that if something's not working or if our audience isn't digesting something, we like to change it. We don't like to just keep doing the same thing over and over. And this has really helped us to understand what resonates with our audience and what doesn't. Next slide, please. So last September, we did a similar collaboration with Shasta Wise, which is another aviation celebrity. She is the first certified civil aviation pilot born in Afghanistan. She is also the youngest woman to fly solo around the world in a single engine aircraft. Now she does a lot of STEM outreach with her organization, Dream Soar. And in addition to the FAA administrator who will be interviewing her, we've also collaborated with Dream Soar to produce and promote their new app that they launched last year called Aviation for Girls. DreamSoar isn't the first nonprofit that we have worked with in creating aviation opportunities for young people, but they certainly won't be the last. We're really excited about these types of opportunities, being able to produce content, videos that we can share not only with our audience, with the 1.5 million followers, but also being able to share it with other organizations so that it reaches different networks, different followers, and that we can hopefully always have our hashtags trending, which is a really big and great way to kind of see that new information pop up, regardless of what platform you're on. Next slide, please. So 2020 was an interesting year for everyone, but specifically it was a challenging year for our STEM AVSED outreach program. As many of you probably know, our STEM representatives, like many others who normally visit classrooms to talk about the importance of STEM and different areas of aviation, were unable to do so. So we had some really brilliant people in a couple of our regions create a very unique opportunity for us to work with FAA outreach representatives to be able to create digital products that we could share outside of the classroom in the DC area, and really being able to highlight opportunities for students and teachers during the pandemic. And this is something that we featured on our blog and we were able to push out via social media. And this is something that we were really excited about because we didn't want kids just to think because they were virtually learning that these opportunities were still not available. Next slide, please. So adapting to virtual classrooms, when FAA representatives could no longer visit them, we wanted to package digital resources to stimulate aviation education in a virtual environment. So we had shared lesson plans for educators and parents that included elementary school activities, middle school, and high school. And this also helped to design and promote the Airport Design Challenge. And if you're not familiar with this program, it was a brilliant idea, well executed, and it really gave a chance for students and to be able to design virtual airports in the video game of Minecraft based on guidance from FAA Aerospace and engineering experts. And one of the preps that I actually sat on with my live events team, there were kids from all over the world and young kids and from India, from different countries in Europe, and also in the United States. And it was such a touching moment because you got to see these kids that were affected by the pandemic, and yet they were so excited to be able to participate in such a creative and a new way of being able to actually design airports in the Minecraft session and being able to actually compete. And that was a really big moment for us. And I hope to have additional Minecraft and design challenges in the future for 2021 and 2022 that will actually focus on additional things besides airports. So we're really excited about that, and hopefully we'll be able to announce that soon. Next slide, please. So Fly From Your Home, this is an example of a lesson plan that we produced with the FAA Tech Center out of New Jersey. And we shared this on our blog, social media platforms, and direct email. And again, this is another opportunity to be able to push this information to teachers and parents and students so that they could continue to do some of this work at home instead of actually being in the classroom due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So just to touch on the Airport Design Challenge one more time, we had nearly 1,300 students from 22 countries join the Design Challenge, and we really cultured an environment of learning, gaming, and airport development. And like I said before, we hope to have additional contests in 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. So going back to the podcast points that I had made earlier, the podcast is a learning resource for anyone who is interested in aviation and aerospace. Everything is simple to understand. It's very much plain language, which we really focus on. We want to make sure that we're not using acronyms, or we call it alphabet soup, to make sure that everyone, regardless of your age or your overall understanding of aviation, that it's really easy and clear to understand. We've invited many new to aviation guests on the show, and to talk about their pathway into the field. Sharing relatable stories is a key part of our strategy for connecting with young people. Next slide, please. So FAA employment opportunities is something that we are really proud of, and I think it's just been so successful. Big shout out to our HR department for making sure that this has been a big priority for our, especially with diversity inclusion. In addition to the outreach that we're doing with K-12 students, we have also been doing more direct outreach to university job and internship fairs. This spring in particular, we brought information from our minority serving institutions internship to HBCUs throughout the United States. So we did some posts targeting 22 universities this spring, in addition to an email campaign. And the result is that we were presently onboarding about 220 interns across the FAA, which is a very large pool of interns. They started actually orientation this Monday. And while perhaps we haven't necessarily engaged with the aviation community directly on this, these internship programs are introducing the next generation to the vast career opportunities within aviation through the lens of the FAA, whether that be pursuing engineering for commercial space programs, finding new innovative solutions for drones, or just introducing them to the interest of flight. And these folks are serving all across the agency, and we're really excited for what they're going to do. They come up with a lot of different projects, they solve problems, they provide a lot of level of service to the agency, and we also love their fresh and new ideas. Through promoting internships like these, are also showing that we are in an agency who really does prioritize diversity and inclusion for minorities, people with disabilities, and people who also identify as LGBTQA+, which is something that, is something that we, as a government agency before, maybe had struggled with, but now, and in the past couple of years, we've really tried to make a new path forward. So just looking forward, and I can take any questions after this, we plan to do more collaboration with Shasta's Dream Soar organization, who is piloting a podcast right now that we hope to be involved in. We are also hoping to massively expand, like I mentioned before, our airport design challenge into other educational opportunities that use video game technologies. And we also hope to work with more influencers. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million followers. What matters to us is that you are an agent for safety, that you care about STEM, and that you're embedded in a community that affects aviation, affects the workforce. So I will just say publicly, if there are any influencers out there that are interested in working with the FAA, we welcome you to contact us. We also have all of our social media platforms open to the public. You don't have to follow us to ask us a question, but we are here to answer your questions, regardless if you're a traveler, an influencer, a student, a pilot, anyone out there. We are here to serve you. And I just really thank you for this opportunity, and I'll answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Allison. That was awesome. I think it's wonderful that you are doing such an, oh, I see clapping. Yes. That you are, you're really thinking about how to meet students where they are, right? And how to reach them in a really innovative and cool way. I think the competition idea is terrific. I mean, I just know from our institution's perspective, when we send students off to robotics competitions and UAV competitions, and it's our version of the NCAA, because we're not an athletics institution, right? And the whole community gets very excited about it. So I think the competition idea is terrific. What about Twitch? Have you given any thought to Twitch, especially since you mentioned the competition piece? That seems to be for those that don't know, it's, where you watch other people play games, basically. If you have teenagers in your house, you know what Twitch is.
Yes.
Any thought about Twitch?
So we don't currently have a presence on Twitch, but I will say this. We work with our general counsel to negotiate any new terms of service with companies that are out there. We did that with Medium, we did that with iTunes, and we are always open to new ideas and new platforms to be able to reach a new audience on. That's something that we really prioritize.
It's awesome. Yeah, I can imagine millions of people watching somebody design an airport in Minecraft,
Yes.
Twitch, right?
Yes.
I mean, that would be so cool. Terrific. All right, Brett, go ahead.
Thanks, Allison. Brett Levanto with the Aeronautical Repair Station Association. First of all, I've got a great TikTok star who's a maintenance technician down in Miami that I'm going to try and connect you with so we can get that pipeline represented.
That would be amazing.
Secondly, I'm curious, mentioning podcasts made me think I'm an avid podcast listener because I, particularly working from home as much as I have to now, I guess I get scared in the silence of my office. So I have podcasts on in the background. It seems like you're creating great content through the FAA's modules, for lack of a better term. Is there any opportunity or a mechanism, whether it's through social media or the general FAA press department, to maybe start making a tour of other podcasts, or because there's a lot of times where I, have particular characters I might like to listen to who make their business podcasting by interviewing different people on summary topics. And when one of those new interviewees comes in, it often opens my eyes to some new topic or action area I'd never even thought about before. Is there any mechanism for a road show, so to speak?
So we haven't done a road show yet, but we are always talking about how to get either our subject matter experts or our FAA administrator or deputy administrator to appear or guest star on other podcasts. We're always looking for that two-way communications. It doesn't have to be on our platform for someone to appear. And sometimes it's actually better if it's not. So we are open to any type of, YouTube shows, any type of other podcasts, you name it. We would love to take it on.
Terrific. Go ahead, Yvette.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Allison, for the great presentation. I think it's admirable what you guys are doing. It definitely noticed an increase, and it's great to hear that it's making an impact. First off, just a comment on your last piece when you talked about when you look at influencers and your first comment about being an agent for safety. I thought that was just a really key thing that we can't lose sight of. And then secondly, I know much of the focus seems to be on like the STEM career, STEM education. But one of the things that has come up at our subcommittee meetings, and I think through this task force publicly, is, are we looking at STEM too closely? Are we excluding some non-STEM students that have the critical thinking skills that may not be interested in science? And so just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the outreach to those kinds of students, and as we look at the pipeline workforce challenges.
Yes, I mean, I think Stevie is a great example of that. When she saw the Instagram post of her friend's brother flying, and it's not like she was in school. She went to the University of Michigan for something completely separate, but she was just interested. And I think it's also about inspiring folks that may want to change what they're doing, or graduated from college, or maybe didn't go to college and now they want to pursue a program and they want to change the direction of their life. I don't think that STEM is the only route that we want to go. I think it's just inspiring anyone, but we do see the interest and the importance of helping the next generation of aviation workforce to understand all the different areas. I mean, I do not have an aviation background, but just by working at the FAA, it's inspired me to look at things much differently. I have folks on my team that are now pursuing different programs, even in urban and regional planning, because of what they've learned from our airports division. So there's a lot of different opportunities there. And, sometimes it's hard to kind of concentrate and prioritize all of them. But we do like to have those brainstorming conversations to understand, like, what's the next route? What is going to inspire somebody to think differently about the importance of aviation and how they can be a part of that safety culture.
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
Allison, great presentation, really inspiring. I am now following Steve Dixon on LinkedIn, so
thank you
for the tip. I am really excited about the fact that you were able to bring in over 200 interns this summer and that you found a creative way to do this. It also tells me that maybe you have a 200-person strong focus group, and maybe we'd be able to pick their brains, because a lot of what we feel good about is what we'd like to do or build. And our strengths probably lie in connecting with parents or teachers or guidance counselors. And where we maybe get a little nervous, or at least I do, is, but how do you get the students to find you or listen to you in a way that works for them? Is there a way, or are you planning some type of effort with your interns to find out how we could continue to resonate with them and their generation?
So the 220 interns that started this Monday, they're actually divided up into certain cohorts throughout the agency, and they work on different either issues or problems or solutions that they're kind of overseeing. Group managers help them to understand and lay out for them. I think that it would be a great idea to be able to tap into them and ask them, different questions, or get feedback, or see, like, are we on the right route, the right path for moving, different needles forward. But I do think that, we had a staff meeting this morning and we had 2 new interns. I don't think that they have an aviation background. I don't think that they, really were even pursuing anything in aviation, but because they were either part of an HBCU or in a minority serving institution, they were able to have this opportunity and they were able to apply for that. And that's really, I think, one of the points that we sometimes miss is you take somebody who doesn't have any background of the FAA or aviation, you put them in an internship, you give them these problems to solve, and now you've transformed their future. Now you've transformed how they look at aviation workforce, and that, could change the entire course of their life in terms of what they're looking to do. So to answer your question, I think, yes, we could definitely tap into that. I know the deputy administrator is spending a lot of time with the interns throughout their session this summer, which is about 10 weeks long. So I think that we should definitely take that back to them.
Great, thank you. And I think it's great, by the way, that they don't have aviation, because that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, almost like a pre and post. Be nice if you could find out if they stay in aviation too. Yeah, great point, Joe. Anybody else?
So I will just close and say that if anyone either that's watching live or here with all of you ever has any questions or wants to reach out to my team and I, our email address is just digital@faa.gov, and that reaches the entire team. We're answering questions from across the country all the time. We, get phone calls from the public, drone pilots, recreational flyers, you name it, they're contacting us. So please feel free to reach out. And we really hope to be able to make a difference moving forward.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Allison. And please thank your team. Great presentation, great effort. Excited to see where it goes next. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Okay. See you back at 1. Enjoy your lunch.